Around 2 a.m., Sasha Samsudian returned to her apartment in downtown Orlando after a fun night out with friends. Security cameras showed her walking into the building alone. But later, police would show up at her door. What they found inside shocked everyone. The clues they uncovered led to a dark and unexpected truth. At just 27 years old, Sasha had carved out a promising life for herself. She worked as a social media manager for a local real estate agency based in Orlando, Florida, a job she was passionate about and in which she excelled. Sasha was more than just a pretty face. She described as energetic, sharp, and vibrant. Colleagues praised her professionalism, while friends admired her zest for life. She worked hard, celebrated often, and had a magnetic presence. Recently, she had moved into uptown apartments at 911 North Orange Avenue, eager to embrace a new chapter in her life. Sasha was thriving both professionally and personally, and she was making every moment count. On the night of the Orlando soccer season finale, Sasha dressed in purple to cheer for her team. After a thrilling win, she joined friends at the Attic Bar on East Pine Street to continue the celebration. Shortly after midnight, she decided to leave. It wasn't unusual for her friends to split up for the night, planning to regroup later. Sasha had plans for breakfast the next morning with a friend. But when she didn't show up and didn't respond to calls or texts, he began to worry. Sasha was always connected and always responsive. Hours went by without a word. By afternoon, concern turned into alarm. Some of her friends went to check on her. In the parking lot of her apartment complex, Sasha's car was there. Inside the back seat was a baby shower gift she had planned to bring that day. They knocked on the door of Unit 34 years, but there was no answer. At 8 p.m., they called 911. When police entered the locked apartment, the living areas appeared untouched. But inside the bedroom, they made a horrifying discovery. Sasha's lifeless body was partially hidden under a duvet, with a hand visible at the edge of the bed. She had been brutally assaulted, abused, strangled, and beaten. Her body bore signs of a struggle, with defensive wounds and abrasions. Her clothing had been torn, the necklace she had worn was tangled in her hair. Her phone, purse, and key fob were missing. There was a strong smell of cleaning agents in the room, and suspicious bleach stains marked the bed sheets. Sasha's cleaning supply cabinet stood open. A condom wrapper and shoe print were found nearby. Investigators noted something unusual. The toilet seat was up, a small but strange detail considering Sasha lived alone. Fingerprints were found on the underside of the seat, and DNA was collected from her body during the autopsy. The medical examiner reported severe trauma to her neck, unlike anything he had seen before. The police turned to the public for help, asking anyone who had seen anything in the early hours of that Saturday to come forward. Security footage from the apartment complex showed Sasha returning home just before 2 a.m. Cameras captured her in the hallway, but her entrance into the building was not straightforward. According to the on-site security guard, Stephen Duxbury, Sasha didn't have her key fob and entered when another resident opened the door. Stephen admitted that he later found Sasha struggling to enter her apartment. She told him she might have left her keys in her car and asked him to walk with her, but moments after stepping outside, she turned back, claiming she suddenly remembered the door code. According to Stephen, she rushed back inside alone. Never see her out again. Stephen would later change his story, now claiming he had seen Sasha again, this time with an unfamiliar man. That detail shifted everything. Police needed to identify this unknown individual and quickly retraced Sasha's steps from the attic bar to her apartment. Detectives mapped out the 30-minute walk and reviewed hours of surveillance footage from that Friday night. In several clips, Sasha stood out in white jeans and a purple top. At one point, a street camera captured her with two other people. Hoping for answers, police issued a press release asking those individuals to come forward. It worked. The two women identified themselves and explained that they had found Sasha wandering alone, clearly intoxicated. She had no phone, no ID, and they were concerned. They decided to share an Uber with her to ensure she got home safely. Before reaching her destination, Sasha suddenly got out of the car when she saw uptown apartments and hurried toward the entrance. The women accompanying her followed to ensure she entered safely. However, when Sasha tried to access the building without her key fob, they encountered the security guard, Stephen, who would not let her in without proper identification. While they were talking, another resident opened the door, allowing Sasha to enter. The women waited briefly with Stephen before leaving once Sasha was inside. Up to that point, all statements were consistent, but investigators still needed to gather more information. Inside Sasha's apartment, police discovered her iPad, which was synced to her iPhone. This connection enabled them to recover messages from the night she died. One text sent at 5:12 a.m. read simply, "Ben." This was the last recorded activity on her devices. Ben was someone with whom Sasha had a casual relationship. He told police they had made tentative plans to meet that weekend and confirmed they had been texting that night. Ben cooperated by providing a DNA sample and was quickly ruled out as a suspect. His alibi was solid. Another man, who was a former boyfriend and remained close to Sasha, was interviewed. He had been working a shift at a bar the night she was killed, and this was confirmed by several witnesses. Like Ben, his DNA did not match any of the samples collected. Just days after Sasha's death, her family held a private funeral. It was a touching ceremony that honored her diverse heritage by incorporating Hindu, Islamic, and Christian traditions. One of her co-workers mentioned that it was only at the funeral that he realized how many lives Sasha had impacted. Meanwhile, the police accessed the off-site CCTV footage from Uptown Apartments and began reviewing it frame by frame. At 1:46 a.m., Sasha was captured on camera entering the building, followed closely by a man who briefly asked if she was okay before disappearing from view. Shortly after, Sasha was seen climbing the stairs toward her apartment and was not seen again. At 2:06 a.m., she reappeared on the footage, running up another flight of stairs, with security guard Stephen following her, just as he had reported to the police. He stated that he walked with Sasha to the parking garage to check if her keys were in her car, but after she remembered her door code, they went back inside. However, something about the situation felt off. Detectives continued to analyze the surveillance footage for several hours after the incident. At 6:36 a.m., they noticed something important. Stephen appeared on camera leaving the second floor with 2 large trash bags. He walked to the parking garage where his car was parked and returned to the building just 2 minutes later. Although he claimed his shift ended at 6 a.m., he did not actually leave until 6:39 a.m. Initially, investigators considered whether taking out the trash was part of his job, but building management confirmed it was not. Alarmingly, the trash bags Stephen carried resembled those found in Sasha's apartment. With this information, police obtained a search warrant for Stephen's home and requested that he take a polygraph test. The man who had been a helpful witness was now a suspect in a murder investigation. As the scrutiny intensified on Stephen, investigators acted quickly. Although he appeared cooperative, his story began to fall apart during the polygraph test. When asked if he had ever entered Sasha's apartment, he denied it, but the polygraph results suggested otherwise. His body responses heightened significantly when he was questioned about Sasha's cause of death. The examiner asked if she had been poisoned, stabbed, or strangled. Stephen denied all possibilities, but his heart rate escalated at the mention of strangulation. This was crucial evidence, as Sasha's cause of death had not been released to the public. There was no way Stephen could have known she had been strangled unless he had been present at the scene. While polygraph results cannot be used in court, the inconsistencies prompted further investigation. At Stephen's home, detectives discovered a pair of shoes that matched a footprint found in Sasha's bedroom. Days later, forensic analysis confirmed that a fingerprint taken from beneath Sasha's toilet seat belonged to Stephen. Additionally, DNA found on her body, including on her chest, matched his as well. The situation deteriorated significantly. His phone history showed a concerning internet search conducted around 5 a.m. on the morning Sasha was killed. He had looked up how to override a quick-set keypad lock, which is the type used on Sasha's apartment door. The timing of this search is particularly unsettling, occurring just minutes before Sasha sent her last message, a single-word text to her, "Ben." Stephen also displayed signs of a struggle, including scratches and a bite mark on his arm. For the detectives, the evidence was becoming increasingly alarming. Stephen had turned into a serious threat. On October 21, 2015, just days after Sasha's murder, Orlando police made a significant announcement. Stephen was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, abuse battery, and burglary. He exploited his role as a security guard to target someone who was vulnerable and defenseless. Investigators believe he followed Sasha into her apartment while she was impaired, then overpowered and assaulted her. After abusively assaulting, strangling her, he attempted to clean up the scene using her household products and removed items from the apartment to dispose of them, including in trash bags that were captured on surveillance cameras. In November 2017, Stephen's trial commenced. His defense team sought to suppress evidence, arguing that his statements made during the polygraph were given under the assumption that he had to cooperate to avoid losing his license. They also requested to exclude important items, such as his shoes and recordings of his interviews. However, the judge denied their requests and allowed all the evidence, including the shoes and polygraph results, to be presented. Legal experts highlighted the importance of this ruling, noting that in a case based on circumstantial evidence, every detail is crucial, and the prosecution was gradually building a strong case. Stephen's assertion that he had never entered Sasha's apartment contradicted the forensic evidence, which included blood, fingerprints, DNA, matching footwear, and digital records, all of which undermined his story. As the trial progressed, the defense continued to raise objections and suggested they would seek to exclude more evidence, but the timeline was tightening. Jury selection was approaching, and once it started, there would be no turning back. The man responsible for the safety of Uptown Apartments residents now faced the consequences of his actions. For Sasha's family and friends, this marked the beginning of a long journey toward justice. During the trial of Stephen, his defense team focused on undermining the prosecution's case. Defense attorney raised several questions, such as why Stephen's clothing had not been tested for DNA and why the shoe prints found in Sasha's apartment were a size 9, while Stephen wore a size 10.5. They noted that there was no security footage of Stephen entering Sasha's apartment. However, the prosecution countered that the evidence's strength did not depend on video footage but rather on scientific findings. DNA from Stephen was found in Sasha's bedroom, and discrepancies in his timeline, along with surveillance footage of him carrying trash bags from her apartment, painted a troubling picture that did not need video proof to be persuasive. When asked about Sasha's injuries, the medical examiner mentioned that the abrasions on her lower body might have been caused by security belt during abuse. Stephen's defense even suggested that he and Sasha had consensual intimate and that someone else could have entered afterward to commit the murder. The prosecutor, however, firmly asserted the state's position. The evidence from the crime scene was undeniable. The trial lasted 7 days. After only 4 hours of deliberation, the jury found Stephen Duxbury guilty. He received a life sentence without the possibility of parole for Sasha Samsudian's murder, plus an additional 15 years for attempted abuse battery with force and burglary with assault. The judge ordered the sentences to be served consecutively. In a poignant moment, Sasha's parents expressed sympathy for Stephen's family, especially his mother, who sat quietly in the courtroom. However, their own grief was still very fresh. Sasha's mother expressed the profound loss, saying, "No future birthdays, no wedding day to prepare for." Every time she attend a wedding, she remembered that they'll never have that for their daughter. The family's struggle continued even after the conviction of Stephen. The Samsudian family filed a civil lawsuit against Uptown Apartments, the security company Vital Security, Spectrum Brands, the manufacturer of the lock on Sasha's door. Their 102-page complaint stated that multiple complaints about Stephen's behavior had been overlooked, and that the keypad lock system he manipulated was known to be faulty. Their attorney emphasized that the lock could be easily compromised with a simple tool like a screwdriver, referencing articles that highlighted failures of the same lock model in other cases. However, the defense countered that there was no proof of a defect since the lock had not been preserved as evidence. It was thrown away by the unit owner after a new tenant moved in. In February 2019, Stephen appealed the court's decision not to allow him to suppress his statements and sought to overturn his conviction for attempted abuse battery. His appeal was rejected. Although justice had been served, the Samsudian family continued to experience deep grief. Her parents transformed their pain into action, collaborating with the Orange County Sheriff's Office to assist other families dealing with violent loss. After Sasha's death, her mother, who had been a trauma nurse, stepped back from her career to focus on supporting victims and survivors. She shared stories and listened to others through programs such as the annual Victims' Rights Breakfast. Sasha was not just a victim, she was a vibrant and passionate young woman who left a mark on everyone she met. One of her co-workers described her as a beautiful soul, noting her deep, caring nature, easy laughter, and the positive impact she had wherever she went. Her family and friends continued to celebrate her life by keeping her kindness and spirit alive through their actions, advocacy, love. Her family's resilience transformed their grief into advocacy, channeling pain into purpose through partnerships with the Orange County Sheriff's Office to support victims of violent crime. Sasha, a radiant soul whose laughter and kindness touched countless lives, remains a beacon of inspiration. Her legacy endures in the love and actions of those who honor her memory, ensuring her spirit continues to shine brightly in a world she once illuminated. Heather Stigliano, a 19-year-old full of promise, energy, and hope, whose journey came to a devastating end in November 1991. Just a few months ago, Heather had arrived in Myrtle Beach, fresh out of high school in rural New Jersey, determined to build a future in the bright lights of the performing arts. She dreamed of acting, of singing. She found a small apartment near the coast and began working at a local restaurant to make ends meet. Every call home to her mother carried the enthusiasm of someone on the brink of something great. But by autumn, something in her voice had changed. Her tone grew subdued, her optimism dimmed. Her friends noticed her absence. Her mother, Susan, felt a gnawing dread she couldn't shake, especially after their last phone conversation, where Heather admitted things weren't turning out the way she'd hoped. They took it upon themselves to check in. They went to her apartment and knocked. No answer. Her car was missing. But intuition told them something wasn't right. When they managed to get inside, Heather was dead. Before we begin to untangle the mystery that surrounds her final days, we need to understand who Heather truly was. Born in 1972 in Dover, New Jersey, Heather grew up in a quiet neighborhood surrounded by the natural beauty of rolling hills and calm, suburban life. Her parents, Victor Stigliano and Susan Wright, provided a loving home for Heather and her two younger siblings. Life wasn't always smooth. Her parents' divorce created challenges, but it never broke Heather's spirit. As a child and teenager, Heather moved between towns in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, Newton, Ransom, Mount Arlington, Roxbury, each one adding to her resilience and independence. She spent much of her school years at Abington Heights in Pennsylvania, where teachers recalled her as intelligent, imaginative, and full of life. Eventually, she finished high school at High Point Regional in Branchville, New Jersey, graduating with honors in 1990. Heather didn't just leave school with a diploma, she left with a dream. She had a gift for performance, a voice that could silence a room and a magnetic energy that made people gravitate toward her. Friends described her as a burst of sunshine, always laughing, always bringing joy, always the first one to lift others up. She had that rare spark, the kind that makes you believe she was destined for something more. But fate had other plans. Heather's father, Victor Stigliano, described his daughter as someone who loved music, theater, and the excitement of crowds, which was part of the reason she came to Myrtle Beach. Back home, things hadn't been easy. Her mother, Susan, had just come out of a difficult divorce. Heather chose to stay by her mom's side for a year, helping her through the pain, the transition, and all the emotions in between. The two were close. Late-night talks about dreams, heartbreaks, and what the future could hold were a regular thing in their household. Susan later recalled one of those conversations, when Heather firmly promised that after that year was over, she would pursue the life she had always imagined. And she did. Heather packed her things and headed for the coast. Myrtle Beach had always been a place she talked about. And her family, though hesitant, supported her dream. She called often, her voice bubbling with stories about the beach, her new friends, and the job she'd landed. Susan held on to every detail, her heart swelling with pride, but behind that pride lived a mother's worry. They believed she'd make it. By the fall of 1991, Heather had been in Myrtle Beach for less than 3 months. She had established herself, far from the small towns in New Jersey and Pennsylvania she had once called home. She had found work as a waitress at Shaw's restaurant. Her apartment was modest but comfortable enough for her to sleep at night. She made friends quickly. Her co-workers, neighbors, even regulars at the restaurant, many were captivated by her warmth. But despite how things looked on the outside, Heather was struggling. In her letters and phone calls, a shift began to appear. The excitement faded, replaced with something quieter. Her words hinted at exhaustion. Just a week before everything changed, sometime in late October or early November, she had spoken to her mother again. The conversation was honest. She admitted that breaking into the entertainment industry wasn't happening as quickly as she had hoped. The path forward felt uncertain. Susan encouraged her to hang on, to come home if she needed a break. And then, no more calls. By November 11th, the silence had stretched into a week. Heather had never been the kind of person to just disappear. Even on her busiest days, she'd find a moment to call, to check in. Her mother's worry grew heavier with each passing hour. And in Myrtle Beach, the people who knew her, her friends at Shoney's, her co-workers, began to worry. Heather wasn't showing up for work, nor was she answering her phone. 2 of her friends decided to check in on her. It was a Monday, one of those quiet, chilly fall days when Myrtle Beach felt like a shadow of its summer self. They drove to her apartment, a small, squat building not far from the main drag. Her car, a decade-old Chevy she'd driven all the way from New Jersey, wasn't parked in its usual spot. That alone was unsettling. Still, they hoped for the best. Maybe she was out. Maybe she'd just forgotten to call. They knocked, called her name. No response. The door wasn't locked. Whether it had been left that way by mistake or something else entirely, they couldn't say. But when they stepped inside, something felt off immediately. The air was thick, heavy in a way that was hard to describe. The kind of stillness that makes the hair on your neck stand up. The living room was in disarray. Furniture knocked askew, broken plastic pieces scattered across the floor like the remnants of a struggle. And then, they saw her. Heather was lying in the center of the room, her body partially obscured by the dim light. A pillow had been placed beneath her head, not tossed there, but positioned carefully. Her clothes were in disarray. It took a moment before they could even process what they were looking at. In that one devastating moment, Myrtle Beach was no longer just a place of new beginnings. It had become the scene of a tragedy. Heather Stiljano was gone. It was later confirmed that Heather had been lying there for days, about a week. Her friends didn't touch a thing. Overwhelmed by shock and fear, they backed out of the doorway and immediately called the police. Myrtle Beach authorities responded quickly. The signs of a struggle were everywhere. Shattered pieces of a household iron, a kitchen knife bent out of shape, and footprints scattered across the room, larger than what Heather's petite frame would have left. Her television had been taken. Her purse was gone. So was her 35mm camera, something she rarely went anywhere without. And most haunting of all was a pillow carefully placed under her head, as if someone had arranged it after taking her life. This was not a botched robbery. This was a targeted, personal incident. The news spread quickly, unsettling residents and sending ripples through the community. From the beginning, detectives treated Heather's death as a homicide. The disorder in her apartment, the broken objects, the missing items, the disturbing placement of the pillow, all pointed to intent. Someone had meant to hurt her. Investigators wasted no time. They started with the people closest to her, friends, co-workers, anyone who might have noticed something off in the days leading up to her death. At Shaw's restaurant, where Heather worked as a waitress, her co-workers were visibly shaken. Many had admired her spark, that magnetic charm that made her popular with regulars. But some remembered something else, how she had recently seemed distracted, not quite herself. One colleague recalled Heather mentioning a man who'd started showing up around the restaurant too often. He wasn't a regular. At the time, it hadn't seemed serious. But now, in light of what had happened, the memory felt ominous. Investigators took note. They moved into the apartment complex, asking around for neighbors. Most didn't have much to offer, as Heather was friendly but kept her distance. But one woman, an older resident who lived across the hall, remembered hearing a loud noise about a week ago, around November 4th. She assumed it was furniture being moved. Throughout the initial investigation, Heather's mother, Susan, remained in constant contact with detectives. That final phone call from Heather, where she admitted feeling homesick, disillusioned, played over and over in her mind. Susan insisted that her daughter wasn't the type to make enemies. She was too sweet, too trusting. But when pressed, Susan did mention a former boyfriend. He had served as a pilot at Pope Air Force Base, and Heather had told her mother he hadn't taken their breakup well. It was a potential lead, and one the police pursued immediately. The ex-boyfriend had been deployed in Saudi Arabia during the exact window of Heather's death. His commanding officer confirmed it. So did flight logs. It was an airtight alibi. He was ruled out. Then, another clue came from Susan. Heather had gone to a party a few weeks before her death. According to her mother, she'd called afterward, shaken and unsure. She'd gotten too drunk, passed out, and woke up with the unshakable feeling that something bad had happened to her, something she couldn't fully remember. Heather had mentioned that an Air Force pilot, married to one of the women at the party, had been there. The man was tracked down and brought in for questioning. He admitted to being at the party but denied anything inappropriate had happened. His wife provided an alibi, claiming he had been home the entire week of November 4th. Investigators took fingerprints, but they didn't match any of the prints recovered from the crime scene. Another potential suspect crossed off the list. Meanwhile, the physical evidence continued to build. The footprints, size 11 sneakers, were far too large to belong to Heather. The bent knife and shattered iron told investigators there had been a struggle, one that suggested her attacker had strength. Then there was the missing car, a weathered Chevrolet Heather had driven all the way from New Jersey. Finding that car became a key part of the case. Detectives fanned out across Myrtle Beach, stopping at gas stations and convenience stores, asking if anyone had seen the vehicle. Eventually, they found someone who had. A gas station clerk, working a late shift just a few blocks from Heather's apartment, remembered seeing the car one night. But it wasn't Heather behind the wheel. Instead, it was a scruffy-looking man the clerk didn't recognize. As the months passed, the chances of Heather's case growing cold increased. The leads were tenuous. Her car remained missing. Investigators were chasing rumors. Then, on November 14th, a suspicious incident surfaced, just 400 yards from the town where she disappeared. An antique dealer in Pawleys Island, about 26 miles south of Myrtle Beach, saw the story on the evening news. Just a week earlier, a man had walked into his shop trying to sell a camera. A 35mm camera, the same kind Heather owned. The man seemed nervous and fidgety, insistent on a quick sale. The dealer, sensing something was wrong, refused the offer. But before the stranger drove away, he jotted down the man's license plate number. It was Heather's missing Chevrolet. Police traced the car south to Melbourne, Florida, where local officers had just pulled over a disheveled man in a routine traffic stop. His name was James Bernard Whipple, a 38-year-old drifter with a long string of arrests. A former construction worker, turned transient, addicted to drugs, he drifted through Myrtle Beach that fall, picking up odd jobs and sleeping wherever he could. When questioned, Whipple's most recent employer told police that James had stopped showing up around November 4th, around the same time Heather disappeared from the grid. Some of Heather's friends vaguely remembered her mentioning a man, someone who may have once slept on her couch. At Shaw's restaurant, a patron swore he'd seen someone who looked like Whipple talking to Heather during a slow shift. Not flirting, just small talk. That night, Melbourne police ran the license plate. A hit came back immediately. It was Heather's missing Chevy. Whipple didn't resist arrest. He didn't run, as if he already knew the road had ended. As it turned out, Whipple was a man falling apart. Born in 1953, he'd spent most of his life drifting from place to place across the American Southeast. His criminal record stretched across 4 states, Florida, South Carolina, Georgia, and North Carolina, marked by petty thefts, burglaries, grand larcenies, and repeated run-ins with the law. Years of substance abuse had hollowed him out, robbing him of a marriage, a family, and any semblance of stability he'd once possessed. When police searched the Chevrolet, they found a chilling array of evidence. Heather's missing wallet, her TV, the 35mm camera, a blood-soaked steak knife, broken pieces of iron, and a pair of size 11 men's sneakers caked with dried blood. A subsequent search of Whipple's motel room confirmed everything. He'd not only killed her but ransacked her house for anything he could pawn. Her personal belongings were scattered throughout the room, waiting to be sold for cash. At the Brevard County Jail, Whipple wasted no time denying involvement. While in custody, he began to confess. He told detectives that he'd entered Heather's apartment on November 4th, exactly 7 days before her body was discovered. He'd gone there to steal cash. He'd heard through a mutual acquaintance that Heather, a waitress, might have stashed away tip money. He said she knew him, perhaps well enough to open the door. Maybe she felt sorry for him. Either way, she let him in. What happened next, he described as a blur fueled by drugs and desperation. Whipple said they talked for a while. Then, suddenly, things turned ugly. He attacked. First with the iron, striking her until it snapped. Then the knife. And finally strangulation, with whatever cord was within reach. Investigators would later confirm it was a lamp cord. Yet, then, there was a haunting detail, the pillow under Heather's head. In some way, he'd wanted her to look peaceful. Afterward, he took what he could, her valuables, her car, and fled. South, to Florida. To disappear. Charges were filed immediately. Whipple was formally charged with first-degree murder, first-degree criminal abuse conduct, armed robbery, and grand theft auto. He had devolved into a predator. And Heather, a kind young woman, had suffered misfortune. The evidence against James Bernard Whipple was overwhelming. There were bloody shoes, a stolen car, and a confession directly linking him to that November night. But in cases like this, justice is not just about catching the culprit, it's about giving the victim's family some peace. Whipple's legal process began swiftly. In 1992, only months after his arrest, he entered a guilty plea to first-degree murder, armed robbery, and grand larceny of a motor vehicle. The plea deal was a calculated move, an attempt to avoid the death penalty. His defense argued for life imprisonment, hoping to spare him execution. The prosecution, led by solicitor Ralph Wilson, didn't oppose the guilty plea itself, but they demanded the harshest possible punishment. They made it clear this was no accident, no moment of lost control. Whipple had entered Heather's home, assaulted her with a series of weapons, and stolen her belongings, all to feed an addiction. In 1992, despite the plea, James Whipple was sentenced to death. For a while, the case seemed to be closed. But in 1994, it came back for a full trial. The prosecution represented its case and convicted him. They portrayed Whipple as a predator who had taken advantage of his fragile relationship with Heather to break into her home. They highlighted the forensic evidence he left behind, her blood on his shoes, a knife that matched her wounds, and unmistakable size 11 fingerprints on the carpet. His confession revealed everything. He had broken into her apartment under false pretenses, killed her in a fit of rage, and fled with her possessions. The motive was a few dollars for his next high. 40 wounds, multiple instruments of death. The prosecution argued that the brutality warranted a suitable punishment. The defense did not deny his guilt, which his own words made impossible. Instead, they pleaded for leniency. They portrayed Whipple not as a monster, but as a man destroyed by addiction. He lost control and took an innocent life in the process. They pointed to his apology in court, an emotional moment when he turned to Heather's family and said that he deserved to be punished and was sorry for all the pain he had caused. They hoped to reduce the aggravating circumstances. After deliberating, the jury returned a verdict. Whipple was guilty on all counts, murder, robbery, and burglary, and they recommended the death penalty. The judge upheld the verdict. Whipple was sent to death row in South Carolina. For Heather's loved ones, it was a difficult victory. Her mother, Susan, later said that sitting through court was like reliving the nightmare over and over. The evidence, the photographs, the confessions, it was a brutal reminder of all they had lost. Then, in 2001, almost a decade later, the story shifted again that a post-conviction relief hearing reopened the case. A judge ruled that the assault charge, one of the aggravating factors, was questionable. The evidence for that charge may have been exaggerated during the trial. As a result, Whipple's death sentence was overturned. The case dragged through legal limbo for another 2 years. By July 2003, a resolution finally came. A deal was struck between 15th Circuit solicitor Greg Hembry and Whipple's attorneys. The state would drop the pursuit of the death penalty if Whipple agreed to waive all rights to parole. Whipple accepted. He was resentenced to life without parole and transferred to Lieber Correctional Institution, where he remains to this day. In a rare interview with the Myrtle Beach Sun News, Whipple stated that parole was a risk he hadn't wanted to take. For him, the deal meant avoiding execution. Susan kept her daughter's memory alive for years. Victor rarely spoke in public anymore. They may have had justice on paper, but Heather's loss left a void that no sentence could fill. Robert Andrew and his wife, Brenda, were no longer on good terms and had been living apart for some time. Despite this separation, it was evident that Robert still cared deeply for Brenda. Their church community in Edmond, Oklahoma, recognized his feelings. He made an effort to check in on her and their 2 children whenever possible. However, Brenda had decided to move on and had restricted Robert's access to their children. On November 20th, 2001, Thanksgiving, they had arranged for Robert to take care of the kids. That evening, he dressed in his best suit and drove to their former home. During the trip, he spoke to a close friend at around 5:30 p.m. The friend recognized the excitement in his voice as he eagerly anticipated seeing Brenda and the kids again. Yet, when Robert arrived and parked in the driveway, something felt wrong. Instead of being greeted by his family, he saw Brenda standing alone in the garage. He quickly ended his phone call and approached her. Brenda immediately mentioned that the furnace had broken and that the house was getting cold, asking if he could help fix it. Robert agreed and bent down to inspect the furnace while Brenda stood by his side. Suddenly, the garage door remained open behind them, and 2 masked men entered, brandishing guns. Before Robert could react, one of the attackers opened fire, hitting him twice in the chest and grazing Brenda in the upper arm. The situation escalated so rapidly that it felt surreal. Minutes later, Brenda was able to call the police and inform them that she and Robert had both been shot by 2 masked men in their garage. Robert and Brenda lived in the affluent Landsbrook neighborhood of Oklahoma, known for its wealthy residents and well-maintained homes. The community was considered safe and peaceful, with nice cars parked on the streets and neighbors looking out for one another. Therefore, the news of the shooting shocked both residents and local police, who could not comprehend how such a violent act could occur in this peaceful area. Brenda, who had been shot in the arm, received treatment at the hospital and was later released. However, Robert's family learned of his death through the heartbreaking news broadcast at 10 p.m. As the investigation unfolded, things became even more unsettling. When the police arrived, they found no evidence of a break-in, robbery, or anything stolen from the home. Robert's wallet was still in his pocket, and nothing in the house appeared disturbed. This caused investigators to suspect that the attack had been premeditated and specifically aimed at Robert and Brenda. But why would anyone want to harm a family known for being kind, friendly, and close-knit? To gain a better understanding of the situation, investigators examined Robert and Brenda's personal lives. Robert Andrew was a Christian, attended church regularly, and was a loving father. He is a successful businessman, who works as an executive at an advertising agency. His work is highly lucrative and has earned him the admiration of many. In addition to his career, Robert was actively engaged in his community and served as a deacon at his local church, where he attended services every Sunday and led early morning men's meetings on Mondays. He was known for counseling and supporting other men, which made him well loved by those around him. Above all, Robert took great pride in his family. He had a deep affection for Brenda since they first met. Their story began in the early 80s when Brenda, a high school senior, developed a crush on Robert, who was a freshman in college. She would often ask his brother Tom about him during encounters at the local pool, leading Tom to play matchmaker. The two started dating in 1982 and married in 1984. They had 2 children, and Robert was the kind of dad who truly cherished his family. He even named their first daughter Tri-City, a unique name he thought would be perfect for a future political career, complete with the catchy slogan Tri-City Electricity. This whimsical idea showcased Robert's creative spirit and sense of humor. Brenda was born on December 16, 1963, and her early life appeared to follow the perfect storybook narrative. She was raised in a strict religious household that greatly influenced her character. Valued for her discipline, she excelled academically, earning straight A's and gaining a reputation for her intelligence. Beyond her studies, Brenda was active in multiple clubs, attended football games, and twirled a baton with her high school team. On the surface, she appeared to be the ideal student, polished, proper, and well-dressed. However, Brenda was not the most popular girl at school. She was quiet and reserved, preferring to keep to herself rather than socialize at parties. While her peers often engaged in typical teenage rebellion, Brenda focused on studying and helping her classmates, which earned her the nickname Goody Two-Shoes. Her decision to abstain from smoking and drinking set her apart, making her somewhat of an outsider in the eyes of other students. Brenda and Robert seemed like the perfect couple. They shared a commitment to family and faith. Robert was a devoted Baptist, and Brenda was a dedicated Lutheran. Brenda's sister Kimberly noted that their values were very similar despite their different denominations. To those around them, they embodied the American dream, a stable, faith-filled couple with a loving family. However, their marriage was far from perfect, even if no one realized it at the time. Robert, deeply in love with Brenda, began to notice subtle changes in her behavior that troubled him. His love led him to overlook certain flaws, but the mounting tension in their relationship became impossible to ignore. He started a journal to document instances when he suspected Brenda of spending time with another man. After they married, Brenda's habits seemed to change. Robert's job often required him to relocate, leaving Brenda alone. At one point, Robert took a job in Texas while Brenda remained in Oklahoma. Although she eventually joined him, this was not the first time Robert's work seemed to take priority. Each relocation forced Brenda to forego job opportunities and friendships for Robert's career. Over time, this continual sacrifice left her feeling exhausted and frustrated. When Robert returned to Oklahoma in 1988, Brenda chose not to follow him immediately. In fact, she didn't move back until December 23, 1990, around the time their first child was born. The time apart raised questions among people, leading them to wonder if the baby was even Robert's, given their lengthy separation. Despite the rumors, Robert never doubted Brenda. He welcomed her back warmly, believing that everything was fine between them. When she settled in Oklahoma, she chose to leave her job at the bank to become a stay-at-home mom. To Robert, this seemed like the perfect family life they had always envisioned. However, Brenda had changed and was no longer the same woman he had married. They had both been active in their church community, with Robert serving as a deacon and Brenda teaching Sunday school, but her behavior soon raised concerns among their peers. Brenda began dressing in a more revealing way and styled her hair differently, abandoning the modest image she once had. One notable incident occurred when Robert invited Brenda to a formal business dinner, where executives gathered to network and discuss work. Known for being openly religious, Robert took pride in his faith. However, when he brought Brenda to the dinner, she wore an outfit that was more appropriate for a date than for a professional event, which caught the attention of his colleagues. Robert documented this incident in detail in his journal. As he continued to write, he revealed more troubling incidents in their relationship. In one entry, he noted that Brenda would buy lingerie and leave it out in plain sight on their bed. Naturally, Robert thought she had plans for a romantic evening, but she never followed through. It felt as though she was teasing him, offering something enticing only to withdraw it. This behavior became a recurring pattern, leaving Robert increasingly frustrated and confused over time. In another entry, Robert recounted a moment when he drove past a motel and saw Brenda with another man. During this time, he began to share his struggles in marriage with his friends and pastor. People close to him later testified that Brenda had become verbally abusive, frequently telling Robert that she hated him and that their marriage was a mistake. This raises an important question: why did Robert endure this treatment? Why stay in a situation that brought him so much emotional suffering? Some might suggest he was trying to salvage his marriage, holding on to hope for improvement. As a deeply religious man, Robert likely felt a responsibility to maintain his family, regardless of his pain. His love for Brenda and his belief in marriage motivated him to persevere, even as everything seemed to be falling apart. This leads us to James Pavitt, another member of their church community. James was not only a deacon like Robert, but he also worked in life insurance. Whenever Robert was away, Brenda and James grew closer, which became concerning enough for church leaders to intervene and ask them to step down from their Sunday school teaching roles. One of the most shocking incidents occurred when Brenda, still married to Robert, decided to go on vacation with James. Strangely, it wasn't just the two of them, it was a family trip that included Robert's children. Photos from the vacation showed Brenda, James, and the kids laughing and enjoying meals together, appearing like a family, with James as if he were the husband, not Robert. Robert and James were friends, having even gone on a hunting trip together. As a life insurance agent, James sold Robert an insurance policy with an $800,000 payout, naming Brenda as the beneficiary. Trusting James as a friend, Robert readily signed the paperwork, unaware that he was sealing his fate. By the summer of 2001, James had already divorced his wife, and in October, Brenda filed for divorce from Robert. The situation became increasingly hostile. Robert chose to leave their home, while Brenda openly expressed her feelings, telling friends that she hated Robert and even wished he were dead. Then, on October 26, 2001, things took a frightening turn. While backing out of his garage, Robert felt something unusual with his brakes. Worried, he took his car to a mechanic, who discovered that the brake lines had been intentionally cut. If Robert had been driving at high speed, as he often did, this could have resulted in a fatal accident. While Robert was at the mechanic's, he received a call from an anonymous person who stated that Brenda had been in a serious car accident and was in critical condition. This shocking news would cause panic in anyone. However, Robert, being skeptical, decided to call the hospital. To his surprise, the hospital had no record of anyone named Brenda. At that moment, Robert realized it was a setup. Someone was trying to trick him into driving dangerously and risking his own life. He immediately went to the police to report his suspicion that Brenda and James were plotting to kill him for insurance money. After a frightening experience involving tampered brake lines, Robert chose to remove Brenda from his life insurance policy and name his brother as the new beneficiary. However, James informed him that the policy couldn't be changed because Brenda was the owner. Things took a darker turn when it was revealed that Brenda and James had attempted to transfer ownership of the policy to Brenda without Robert's consent. They forged his signature and backdated it to March 2001. This forgery became a key piece of evidence that the police were searching for. They obtained the life insurance policy and consulted a handwriting expert for analysis. The investigators didn't only examine this document, they also looked at several other papers Robert had signed over the previous decade to check for signature consistency. Robert had a unique way of signing his name, always adding a squiggle underneath it, resembling the Christian fish symbol. This was a distinct feature he included every time he signed something. However, this signature squiggle was absent from the life insurance policy. As the investigation into Robert's tragic death continued, the police focused more closely on the details of the crime scene. Robert and Brenda were attacked in the garage, and witnesses reported hearing at least 3 gunshots. However, only 2 bullet casings were recovered, one from a .22 caliber revolver and another from a shotgun. This led the police to believe that 2 different guns were used, indicating the involvement of at least 2 shooters. Brenda reported that 2 masked men had approached the garage and fired at her and Robert from approximately 15 to 20 feet away. While her story seemed plausible initially, investigators began to spot inconsistencies. A significant concern was Brenda's blouse, which not only had blood on it but also gunpowder. This was unusual because gunpowder typically disperses when a gun is fired. The quantity of gunpowder on her sleeve suggested that the shots were fired from much closer than Brenda indicated. Her claims of being shot at from 15 to 20 feet were likely inaccurate. The evidence implied that the guns had been fired just inches away, indicating a more personal and intentional attack than she described. Further complicating matters was the discovery related to Robert's shotgun. Though it was stated that Robert owned a 16-gauge shotgun, Brenda had prevented him from taking it when he moved out. When the police searched her home, they found no sign of the shotgun. The investigation took an unexpected turn when police searched the house of the neighbors, who were away during the incident but had given Brenda a key. They found something troubling. A small opening in a bedroom closet led to the attic. Inside the attic, officers discovered a spent 16-gauge shotgun shell on the floor, along with several .22 caliber bullets scattered around. There was no sign of forced entry, suggesting that Brenda had indeed accessed the neighbor's home. Moreover, the shotgun shell found in the neighbor's attic matched the brand and gauge of the shell discovered in the garage, which further connected Brenda to the crime scene. The investigation took a crucial turn when Jan, James's daughter, provided important evidence. She revealed that she had lent her car to her father on the day of the murder because he offered to have it serviced. When James returned the car the next morning, Jan noticed that it had not been serviced at all. Upon inspecting the vehicle, she discovered a .22 caliber bullet on the floorboard. This bullet matches the brand of 3 rounds found in the neighbor's attic. When Jan confronted James about the bullet, he told her to throw it away, raising further suspicions. Investigators later learned that James had bought a handgun just a week prior to the murder. These developments painted a troubling picture, revealing increasing connections between James, Brenda, and Robert's death. On the day of Robert's funeral, investigators planned to question Brenda and James to gather more information. However, neither Brenda nor James attended the funeral, nor did Robert's children. This absence was particularly alarming, as it is unusual for a spouse to miss their partner's funeral. Instead of honoring Robert's memory, Brenda, her 2 children, and James made the drastic decision to flee to Mexico. While in Mexico, James seemed oblivious to the fact that he was being watched. He called his daughter Jan several times, asking her for money, unaware that she was actually cooperating with the FBI and sharing details about his and Brenda's roles in Robert's murder. By late February 2002, James and Brenda had run out of money. With no other options, they returned to the United States, believing they could remain unnoticed. However, their plan failed. Authorities were tracking them, and they were soon arrested in Hidalgo, Texas. They were quickly taken back to Oklahoma City to face charges related to Robert's death. The trial of James, which started in 2003, was a significant event. Throughout the proceedings, his personality remained somewhat unclear. He spoke very little, and not much information was available about his life. The jury found James Pavitt guilty of first-degree murder, resulting in a death sentence. Oklahoma, known for its firm stance against crime, imposed this sentence without much hesitation. James's ex-wife stated that despite the murder charges against him, she still cared for him and found it difficult to testify against him. She explained that during their 9 years of marriage, when James was in love, he would go to great lengths for her. During her testimony, she expressed her surprise at the moment James first suggested the idea of divorce. He claimed it was for her protection due to the challenges he faced during his time in the Special Forces, particularly related to his experiences in Korea, which he described as the only place where he felt safe. Eventually, she moved to Korea for a brief period but returned to Oklahoma City when James said he had made a huge mistake. Upon her return, she noticed a drastic change in him. He was no longer the kind and loving person she had known. Nevertheless, she maintained that James's reasons for the divorce were not entirely malicious. A year later, it was Brenda's turn to face the court. Like James, she was found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. The prosecution argued that Brenda fired the shot that killed Robert after James shot him first, causing Robert to fall to the ground. Evidence supported this claim, as blood splatter on Brenda's pants indicated close-range gunfire. After the shooting, she reported the incident to the police but also gave James the key to a neighbor's house so he could hide during the investigation. The neighbors had no involvement in the crime but were caught up in Brenda's scheme. During her trial, the prosecution depicted Brenda as a cold and manipulative woman with a history of infidelity. Testimonies from Robert's friends revealed their troubled marriage and suggested that Brenda had been abusive toward him. By the end of the trial, she was seen as a sadistic and ruthless character, leading the jury to sentence her to death. Over the years, there have been numerous cases in which life insurance policies have been involved in tragic murders, often within seemingly perfect families. Some argue that Brenda didn't have to resort to murder. She could have continued with her divorce, sought alimony, and received monthly support from Robert, who had a six-figure income. Instead of taking that route, she chose a darker path. Now, Brenda is on death row awaiting execution. She was recently denied an appeal. Just last year, the 10th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals upheld her murder conviction in a 2-1 decision. The Supreme Court has relisted her case multiple times, generating renewed interest in her story. Meanwhile, James has exhausted all his appeals and is now eligible for execution. His execution date was initially set for July 11, 2014, but it has since been postponed, and a new date has not yet been announced. It was a calm and quiet Saturday morning in the Norfolk countryside, a perfect day for residents to take their dogs for a walk and enjoy the fresh air and serene environment of East Harling. Everything seemed normal until a couple, out on their regular stroll, stumbled upon something that made them pause. Initially, it appeared as though someone had fallen or had an accident, but as they approached, they discovered it was something far more serious. East Harling, a quaint village located in the heart of Norfolk, is known for its charm and sense of community. With its slow pace of life, friendly residents, and beautiful natural surroundings, it has long been regarded as a peaceful retreat. One of the village's favorite spots is East Harling Common, a wooded area near Five Ways Junction, about 3 miles from East Harling, where locals often walk their dogs and enjoy the countryside's tranquility. A familiar figure in the village was 83-year-old Peter Wrighton, a retired man who lived with his wife Anne, his partner of 59 years, along with their 2 beloved dogs, Gemma and Dylan. A devoted animal lover, Peter spent his retirement caring for rescue dogs and enjoying long, peaceful walks through. On the morning of August 5, 2017, Peter followed his regular routine. He woke up around 7:30 a.m., greeted his dogs, made a cup of tea for Anne, and then left the house, then stopping at Kenninghall Post Office to buy some pastries. By 10:20 a.m., everything had changed. That morning, a couple was walking their dogs in the heath when they noticed 2 dogs running loose, apparently without an owner. As they got closer, they spotted blood stains near some brambles, near Five Ways Junction. What they initially thought was a discarded mannequin turned out to be Peter's body, partially hidden in the underbrush. He had suffered severe injuries, with 45 stab wounds, many on the back of his neck, and a deep cut that reached his spine. Despite being older, he had defensive wounds on his hands, indicating he had fought back. His loyal dogs stayed by his side until help arrived. The peaceful village was soon filled with flashing lights and investigators. Anne, unaware of the tragedy, arrived at the scene and was taken home by officers, then delivered the heartbreaking news. This horrific event devastated the community. Peter, a kind, gentle man known for his warmth, was deeply mourned by friends and neighbors. Flowers were placed throughout the heath, and his family remembered him as someone who was always kind to others. The investigation that followed was among the largest ever carried out by Norfolk Police, involving over 100 officers and support from the National Crime Agency. The case was complicated due to the lack of a clear motive, no signs of robbery, and no CCTV footage. Officers worked to retrace Peter's last movements, noting he was seen at a local shop at 10:08 a.m. and later spotted driving his red Skoda toward the heath. They sought witnesses and concentrated on 3 unidentified men seen in the area that morning. One of these men had been changing his shirt near the scene. A breakthrough occurred when a local man, who also walking his dog that morning, reported a suspicious individual. This man was alone, not accompanied by a dog. He dressed in flip-flops and shorts, unusual for the woods. His behavior was odd, as he avoided eye contact with others. A detailed description led to the creation of a sketch, which provided investigators with a promising lead. This lead pointed to Alexander Palmer, a 24-year-old former commando. Despite having no criminal record, a psychiatrist who had treated him recognized him from the sketch. Palmer had a troubled history of severe mental health issues stemming from a violent incident during his military training. After he was discharged in 2015, his condition deteriorated. His family reported a significant change in his personality. He began experiencing disturbing delusions and auditory hallucinations. He developed a troubling obsession with dog walkers, believing they were whispering insults about him and often expressing his hatred for them in writing. One diary entry from 2015 chillingly outlined a plan to attack dog walkers, stating, "I hate dog walkers. If I do this, everyone will know my name." In early 2017, troubling signs began to surface that would lead to a disturbing investigation. Alexander, who was already known to mental health services, wrote in his journal about feeling overwhelmed. He stated, "I'm nearly ready. All this pain and hatred has been building up inside for so long. I can't stop it now, it's getting hard." Around the same time, he informed his psychiatrist that he was hearing voices, hallucinations telling him to harm others. He also revealed that he had bought a machete and a hunting knife. Concerned about this information, a specialist evaluated him and sent a letter to Alexander's psychiatrist, urging him to dispose of the weapons. However, any hope that he would comply faded as the investigation into the brutal murder of 83-year-old Peter advanced, with evidence increasingly pointing to Alexander. In the early hours after suspicions grew, the police quickly arrested him. The police found DNA on Peter's trousers that matched a sample taken from Alexander. Additionally, they discovered Peter's blood on Alexander's jacket collar, further linking him to the crime scene. Alexander initially stated that he had been in the area that day but had not seen or interacted with Peter. He claimed he had wandered through the woods, feeling emotional, even crying, before going back to his car and leaving. The evidence painted a different picture. When questioned, Alexander had difficulty explaining how his DNA was found on the victim. His responses were unclear and seemed to avoid giving direct answers. Investigators confronted him about his interest in weapons, military strategies, and violent thoughts, highlighting that his presence in the woods appeared suspicious rather than accidental. Further examination of Alexander's vehicle revealed a map marked with specific areas near the heath. CCTV footage showed he changed his shirt from light to dark that day, despite his claim that he hadn't changed at all. A picture of a knife was also found on his phone, which forensic experts believe matches the weapon used in the murder, but that knife has never been found. Among the disturbing evidence is a selfie Alexander took shortly after the murder. With increasing physical evidence, inconsistent statements, and his digital activity pointing to his involvement, Alexander was charged with the murder of Peter. Before the trial began, he underwent psychiatric evaluations to assess if he was mentally fit to stand trial and if he understood his actions. The evaluations confirmed that he could stand trial and understood the consequences of his actions. In February 2018, Alexander's trial commenced. During the proceedings, recorded interviews showcased his ongoing mental health issues. He spoke of a voice he called Little Alex, which had evolved from a hallucination to a constant voice in his head. The prosecution built a strong case not just on DNA and physical evidence, but also on phone records showing Palmer in the area between 10:19 a.m. and 10:51 a.m., a crucial period for the investigation. Surveillance footage confirmed his car left the area shortly afterward. Additionally, 2 weeks before the murder, he drove the same route to the Heath, indicating he may have premeditated the act. The court was told that Alexander's personal license plate read L666AHP and was bought by his mother as a joke because he was a little devil. Alexander chose not to testify in court, but his defense claimed he was experiencing a severe mental disorder during the attack. They pointed to a traumatic event in 2013 when Palmer was violently assaulted during military training as a key moment in his mental decline. On the other hand, the prosecution highlighted Alexander's previous comments to mental health professionals, where he admitted to fantasizing about harming others in a premeditated way. In one alarming statement, he said, he will plan the method in his head, go to the spot he chooses for the act, and then he will hurt someone. It can be anyone. Ultimately, the evidence against him was overwhelming. The case showcased not only a brutal and senseless murder, but also a significant failure to acknowledge and respond to the warning signs of a deeply troubled individual. For the small community of East Harling, this incident served as a tragic reminder of how fragile safety can be, even in peaceful areas. During Alexander Palmer's trial, the prosecution emphasized a particularly disturbing aspect of his behavior, his obsession with harming strangers, especially dog walkers. This unsettling preference was central to the case against him for the brutal murder of 83-year-old Peter Wrighton. The lead detective testified about how methodically Alexander executed the attack, describing him as someone whose actions were calculated, shockingly ruthless and cold. Simultaneously, Detective Superintendent Marina Erickson, leading the investigation, described Palmer as callous and calculated. The first officers at the scene thought the victim might have been attacked by an animal because the level of violence was so intense that it seemed almost animalistic. One of the first responders from the Norfolk police admitted he had never seen anything like it before. The severe injuries, the large amount of blood, and the randomness of the attack had a profound impact on him. At one point, he even wondered if Peter had been hurt by his own dogs. The couple who was walking their own dogs nearby were shocked to discover Peter's body. They initially thought the man lying on the ground had simply fallen. She was going to help him up, the woman testified in court, but then she saw the wound and realized he was gone. Her husband also shared his experience, describing the deep neck wound and the large blood stain on the path. The jury took only 44 minutes to deliver their verdict. Alexander Palmer was found guilty of murder and received a life sentence with a minimum of 28 years. Unlike some defendants with severe mental health issues, he was not sent to a psychiatric hospital but instead placed in the general prison population. As he was taken away, Alexander showed little emotion, apart from quietly saying, "I love you," to his parents. For Peter's family, including his daughter Carol Todd, son Andrew Wrighton, and granddaughter Meg Todd, the loss was overwhelming. Peter's wife, Anne, who had been married to him for 59 years, was described as heartbroken. The family expressed gratitude to the police for their dedication and compassion, as well as to the community for their support throughout this difficult time. After the trial, 2 major reviews were initiated. One review examined the actions of the police and local agencies, while the other urgently focused on the psychiatric facility that treated Alexander several times from 2014 to 2017. This review revealed serious shortcomings, especially regarding Alexander's final discharge. There were not enough staff, his doctor missed the discharge meeting, and, incredibly, he was released through a text message. Peter's granddaughter, Meg, expressed what many felt, stating that they knew the system was under pressure but questioned how someone who was clearly dangerous could be released without a doctor even seeing him. She was shocked to learn that Palmer had expressed a desire to harm dog walkers but was still allowed to leave care. As more information came to light, the extent of the institutional failure became evident. Alexander's parents had warned the psychiatric facility that he was collecting knives and refusing medication. His stepfather recalled that Alexander had openly said killing someone was inevitable. Once he realized his parents were aware of the weapons, he became even more secretive. Peter's murder lasted only moments, but its impact extended far beyond that day on the Heath. Despite the profound sadness, those who knew Peter remember him for his warmth, generosity, and love for animals. On that ordinary morning, he set out for a peaceful walk to bring home cakes for his beloved Anne. Tragically, he encountered a man struggling with mental issues, someone who should not have been allowed to wander freely. Peter Wrighton is remembered not only through the lives of the dogs he rescued, but also in the hearts of those who loved him. Kathleen Daphne and David Franklin Bagby met in the 1960s when they went to Disneyland with mutual friends. At that time, David was serving in the U.S. Marine Corps. He was intelligent, charming, and sociable, which caught Kathleen's attention right away. They quickly found harmony, chatting throughout the trip, and soon after meeting, they became inseparable. After just 5 months, they decided to get married. After that, they settled in San Diego, California. Kathleen began her career as a nurse, while David became a software engineer after completing his military service. They wanted to have children, but for many years, they focused on their careers in the medical field. At that time, planning a family was not as common as it is today. Still, Kathleen tried to conceive. They also considered adopting from an orphanage. Finally, their joy came when they had a baby boy named Andrew. The family of 3 then moved to the suburbs of San Jose. From a young age, Andrew was friendly and outgoing, participating in various activities and earning awards for his hard work. He had a best friend named Kurt, with whom he shared a passion for creating funny videos. Andrew was very close to his family and prioritized spending time with them. When he started college, he began dating Heather, who was also studying in a similar field. Andrew aspired to become a doctor, inspired by his mother's nursing career. This shared interest deepened their bond, as they often discussed medicine together. The family appeared to be very harmonious and seemed like a model for others. After college, Andrew applied to multiple medical schools but was only accepted to one, which was a significant disappointment for him. He felt anxious and planned to reapply the following year, intending to work in the meantime to ease the financial burden on his parents. Just days after receiving the rejections, Kathleen discovered an envelope from Memorial University of Newfoundland in Canada, which contained an acceptance letter for Andrew. The letter had been misplaced among other mail. This news drastically changed Andrew's life. In 1995, he moved to St. John's, Canada, where the university was located. The following year, Heather also decided to attend the same university and moved there, but their relationship began to struggle after a few months. A traumatic experience unfolded for Andrew when his girlfriend, Heather, unexpectedly ended their engagement without any explanation. To cope with this pain, he focused intensely on his studies. This continued until his 3rd year of college, when, in the spring of 1999, he met a woman named Shirley Turner. This marked Andrew's first relationship after his breakup with Heather. Initially, everyone, especially his friends and family, welcomed the news, relieved that he was open to dating again. However, the initial happiness was short-lived. Shirley was significantly older than Andrew. He was 26, and she was 38. This age difference led to misunderstandings between them. Shirley had graduated from Memorial University and worked as a teacher for many years. In the mid-1990s, she decided to return to school for medical training and earned her diploma in 1998, becoming a resident in various hospitals. By this time, Shirley had gained a questionable reputation for allegedly mistreating patients and being involved in conflicts. One of her former managers noted that he often felt manipulated during their communications. She was known to lie frequently, which contributed to many disputes. From the start of their relationship, Shirley was very controlling. She wants to be with Andrew all the time, but his friends find her reliance a bit excessive. She often touches and hugs him inappropriately while discussing their relationship, which makes him feel uncomfortable. When Shirley learned about Andrew's attractive ex-fiancée, Heather, she became visibly upset and started contacting other women to brag about her relationship with Andrew. This behavior tarnished her reputation, and Andrew's friends and family began to dislike her. They subtly suggested that he could find someone better, given his kind nature and good looks. However, after breaking up with Heather, Andrew struggles with low self-esteem and genuinely feels that Shirley is the best person he could have. After graduating from university in 2000, Andrew moved to Syracuse, New York, hoping to find a job at a medical center. At the same time, Shirley relocated to Sac City, Iowa, a small town with a population of about 2,000, where she signed a 10-year contract to work at the county medical center. Andrew's family was relieved that the two had finally separated and would no longer be in contact. However, despite the distance, Shirley was determined to maintain her connection with Andrew and continued to pursue him. Andrew was very busy with work, which made it difficult for him to visit Shirley. However, Shirley often traveled on business trips to see him. During her visits, she often called him on his home or mobile phone. On one occasion, she stayed at his apartment until he had to leave for work. After they said goodbye, Shirley called him, claiming that she had left her purse behind. Andrew gave her his keys, and when he returned home from work, he discovered that many more items were missing than just her purse. This makes him doubt her honesty. However, despite feeling betrayed, Andrew still believes he doesn't deserve a better relationship and chooses to stay in his relationship with Shirley. About a year later, Andrew realized he was unhappy with his job and living situation, so he moved to Throop, Pennsylvania, a small town with a population of 88,000. By 2001, he decided to pursue a career in family medicine, believing that this community would be a perfect fit for his aspirations. He envisioned himself as a beloved local doctor, admired and respected by the residents. Although his dream was starting to materialize, Shirley's presence became a problem. She was still eager to be with him, but by then Andrew was tired of her clinginess and had focused entirely on his work. He wanted to break up, but Shirley seemed oblivious to his feelings and clung to the hope of eventually living together. Andrew began to ignore Shirley, but she became increasingly obsessed. She sends him 30 voice messages a day. Although Andrew was firm about ending the relationship, in September 2001, Shirley informed him that she was pregnant and claimed he was the father. Andrew felt happy about becoming a father, but he didn't want to be involved with such a clingy woman. He knew that Shirley would continue to interfere in his life, potentially sabotaging any new relationships. Every time he chats with a new girl, Shirley immediately recognizes it, contacts the girl, and informs her that she is pregnant with his child. Unsurprisingly, these new relationships never lasted. As time went on, Shirley publicized her pregnancy and Andrew's supposed fatherhood. Initially, she considered having an abortion but later announced her decision to keep the baby. Her manipulations worked. Within a month, she convinced Andrew to restart their relationship, and they even contemplated engagement. By late October 2001, Shirley met with Andrew's friends and family, and it was evident that she was pressuring him to reconcile. On November 3rd, she left for a trip, and Andrew hoped this distance would give him peace. However, just 2 days later, on the morning of November 5th, 2001, she showed up at his door again. Andrew needed to go to work and didn't want to engage with Shirley, but she insisted on having a serious conversation, so he reluctantly allowed her to stay in his apartment. He informed her that they could talk later at Keystone Park. Throughout his workday at the hospital, Andrew's colleagues noticed his anxiety. When they asked what was troubling him, he described his unsettling encounter with Shirley. They advised him to cut ties with her as soon as possible and not waste any more time. Determined to end the relationship, Andrew planned to meet Shirley that evening and hoped to be free by 7:30 p.m. He was looking forward to meeting his best friend Clark at a bar at 9 p.m. to celebrate his newfound freedom from her obsession. Clark arrived at the bar on time, but Andrew never showed up, which worried him since Andrew had never been late before. Clark assumed that Andrew's conversation with Shirley had run long and thought they would see each other in the morning at work. However, when that didn't happen and Andrew missed his shift the next day, Clark began to panic. Andrew didn't answer calls from Clark, his friends, or his parents. By 9 a.m., Clark considered calling the police, but he didn't have to. News broke on television that a man in medical attire had been found dead in Keystone Park. The man was identified as Andrew Bagby, who was 28 years old. A homeless person had found his body in the parking lot next to his car at 6 a.m. He had been attacked 5 times in the back, face, and chest, and it appeared he was attacked again in the back of the head while he was already down. Clark immediately contacted the police, informing them that they wouldn't have to search for the suspect long because he knew who Andrew had been with prior to the incident, Shirley. He explained their conflict and mentioned that Andrew had intended to break up with her that evening at Keystone Park. However, Shirley does not accept this and wants to get back together with Andrew. The connections were too apparent. The detectives took this information seriously and reached out to Shirley, who was already back in her hometown in Canada. She claimed that she had been in Iowa all day, sick, and then with her parents. This was clearly a lie because she went to talk to Andrew and stayed at his apartment. By this time, the police had interviewed many of Andrew's friends, colleagues, and relatives, all of whom pointed to Shirley as the person with whom he had conflicts. None believed her story. The key evidence came from a witness who saw a Toyota RAV4, matching Shirley's car, in the parking lot at 6:10 p.m. The authorities, however, chose to take their time, planning for the next 2 weeks to gather a solid case against her before filing charges. Evidence strongly suggested that Shirley was guilty. Her initial lie was quickly proven to be false, and CCTV footage, along with phone call records, showed that she had been near Andrew's house early that morning, November 5, 2001. Shirley had purchased a .22 caliber pistol and received firearms training from an instructor, who noted that the pistol had a peculiar malfunction. At the crime scene, police found 5 spent cartridges and 1 unspent cartridge, which could be linked to the malfunction, especially since Andrew was shot with the same type of weapon. The detectives wanted to examine Shirley's pistol, but she claimed she could not find it. She maintained that she had spent November 5th in bed in Iowa, but the police caught her in a lie when they presented CCTV evidence and call recordings from her journey to see Andrew. She left a considerable digital footprint, frequently contacting him in an attempt to rekindle their relationship. When Shirley arrived at Andrew's apartment that morning, he let her in and even allowed her to wait there until he returned from work. During her visit, a pack of condoms went missing from his home, and a pack from the same batch was subsequently found at Shirley's house in Iowa after the incident. This further indicated that she was not being truthful, as she seemed to forget critical details. It seems strange that Heather also witnessed the tragic incident. Although she had tried to avoid meeting Shirley, Shirley managed to confront her. Shirley made statements claiming that Andrew loved her more and that their intimate relationship was more fulfilling. Their love, despite Andrew's passing, will forever be in heaven, which scares Heather so much that she decides to file a restraining order against Shirley. Notably, shortly after the funeral, Shirley quickly prepared to go to Canada to assist the authorities. In an effort to draw her back to the U.S., Andrew's family planned another memorial service and invited her, but she declined the invitation. Currently, U.S. police must cooperate with Canadian authorities due to procedural issues. This coordination is very slow, and in the meantime, Shirley may remain free. The Canadian police arrested her on December 12, 2001, but discussions about extradition had not yet begun because of additional bureaucratic hurdles. It was expected that she would remain in jail until then. However, she was released on bail the very next day. She was required to surrender her passport and report to the police weekly. Notably, her psychiatrist assisted in the process and even paid part of her bail. In addition, she was instructed to refrain from contacting 8 individuals who have restraining orders against her, including her ex-husband and several others. As detectives investigated Shirley's background, they were alarmed by her behavior. She had been married twice and had 2 children with her first husband. However, she had cheated on him with another man who became her second husband, with whom she had another child before getting divorced. In 1993, Shirley lived with a roommate who was appalled by her treatment of her children. Shirley often hid them, sometimes using objects, which led her roommate to move out and report Shirley's actions to the authorities. Witnesses confirmed that Shirley would physically abuse her children and leave them home alone for over a day. However, her second husband denied these allegations and claimed that she was a good mother. In January 1990, she relinquished custody of her children to their biological fathers and carried on as if nothing had happened. Later, detectives found another boyfriend, who described how cruel she was. On one occasion, she struck him in the face with her shoe multiple times, although he wasn't seriously injured. He decided to break up with her after finding her unconscious in her room, showing signs of prescription drug abuse. She was in her underwear, surrounded by roses and letters, including one addressed to her psychiatrist, in which she stated that she wasn't angry but merely unwell. Shirley's behavior was alarming, yet it seemed normal due to her lack of empathy and inadequate treatment, which allowed her to harm those close to her. This ultimately led to a tragic incident. After her release on bail, Shirley held a press conference revealing that she was 4 months pregnant. Upon learning this, Andrew's parents, Catherine and David, sold everything they owned and moved to Canada to seek custody of the child, believing that he is Andrew's son. Shirley's son, Zachary, was born on July 18, 2002, and a DNA test confirmed that Andrew was his father. However, when Catherine and David arrived at the hospital, Shirley refused to let them see their newborn grandson. Given Shirley's behavior with her other children, they feared for Zachary's safety and were distressed by the slow pace of the Canadian legal system. Their attempts to gain custody faced numerous obstacles, and they worried about Zachary's well-being under his mother's care. Extradition to the U.S. was repeatedly delayed for various reasons. In the end, Catherine and David were allowed only 1 hour a week to visit Zachary, and these meetings were monitored as if they posed a threat to him. They had to undergo searches before each visit. Despite these challenges, Zachary brought joy to them, who had lost their only child and were unable to have more. In November 2002, there was finally some progress. Shirley was incarcerated, and the process for extradition to the U.S. began. She willingly transferred full custody of Zachary to Andrew's parents, Catherine and David, but this transfer included certain stipulations. Shirley insisted on daily phone calls and required them to visit her in prison once a week. Catherine and David were diligent, never missing a visit to comply with her conditions, fearing that any sign of neglect could lead to her taking away their custody rights. In January 2003, Shirley was released from custody again. She had appealed directly to the judge in her case for advice on how to avoid prison before being extradited to the United States, as she wanted to take care of her son. To everyone's surprise, the judge met with her and provided detailed recommendations. Despite how unusual this was, Shirley followed the advice and was released. As a result, Kathleen and David once again lost full custody of Zachary but were permitted to spend more time with him without interference from Shirley or social workers. Even though Andrew's family was unhappy with the situation, the judge insisted there was no reason to fear for Zachary's safety. This was despite Shirley's past behavior, which included the suspicion of Andrew's murder and incidents of threatening another inmate with a fork during her imprisonment. Kathleen and David despised Shirley for killing their son, but they did their best to maintain their relationship with Zachary. It became clear that Shirley began to exploit this situation. She started to manipulate them. She frequently called them at all hours, demanding financial support. Additionally, she often brought up Andrew's death, a topic that Kathleen and David were desperate to avoid. During Zachary's birthday celebration at McDonald's, when he ran over to hug Grandma Kathleen, Shirley became furious. She yelled that she would not allow Kathleen to love him more than she loved him. From that moment on, Shirley made life difficult for Andrew's parents. It seemed she was not genuinely interested in keeping custody of the child. Instead, her primary goal appeared to be to cause trouble for them. A hearing regarding her extradition was scheduled for September 2003, and this would be the last step before she would be sent to the United States. While waiting for this hearing, Shirley began dating a new boyfriend. However, when he learned about her troubling past, he ended the relationship. As was typical for her, Shirley began stalking him, threatening him, and claiming she was pregnant. She repeatedly called and caused dramatic scenes, but he ignored her. On August 17th, she told a friend that she planned to take Zachary and go to her ex-boyfriend's house to settle things. Reports indicated she stopped on the road to ask for directions, which was the last time she and Zachary were seen alive. The following day, August 18th, 2003, they vanished. No one could reach Shirley. That same day, a couple on vacation found the bodies of a woman and a small child about 20 minutes from St. John's. The police identified the boy as Zachary Turner. A forensic examination revealed that Shirley had taken an overdose of anxiety medication, and the same substance was discovered in a bottle of baby formula. A witness reported hearing a child crying near the beach around 2:30 a.m., but he couldn't locate the source. Forensic experts suggested that Shirley mixed her prescribed medication with Zachary's formula and subsequently began taking over-the-counter drugs. She then tied her son to her chest with a sweater and jumped into the ocean. Both drowned. Shirley's car was found near the house of the man she intended to visit that night. She left behind pictures of herself with Zachary and wrote a letter stating that the man had wanted her to do it. However, investigators realized this was part of her pattern of manipulation. She aimed to create problems for a man who had no knowledge of her plans. As expected, she was not actually pregnant, which was another form of deceit. Zachary's death brought unbearable sorrow to Kathleen and David. They cremated the boy just as they had done with his father, Andrew, and scattered his ashes in the same place where they had previously scattered his father's ashes. Later, David confessed that he felt so desperate about his grandson's safety and so frustrated with the Canadian authorities that he contemplated killing Shirley. He wanted to take matters into his own hands and confront the woman responsible for their pain. David kept this thought from Kathleen and now deeply regretted not acting on it. He believed that if he had, Zachary might still be alive and he and Kathleen would have been able to care for him. David abandoned this idea because he hoped that the hearing would ultimately result in Shirley's extradition to the United States. There, they will have greater opportunities to fight for custody of Zachary, the sole joy in their lives. When they learned that Zachary had died, they were heartbroken and even considered ending their own lives. However, they chose instead to pursue justice to prevent other families from experiencing similar tragedies. The situation became more difficult because their lawyers did not communicate with them. In the USA, Kathleen and David shared their story on television, feeling that the Canadian law enforcement system was primarily to blame for what had happened. They started a campaign against the psychiatrist who had helped secure Shirley's bail, which allowed her to be released during the investigation. This psychiatrist faced criticism and was fined. They also denounced the judge who had allowed her release, enabling her to endanger her child, Zachary. In October 2006, a child protection expert released a document of more than 500 pages, asserting that Zachary's death could have been avoided. This report spurred reforms in the Canadian judicial system. 3 years later, in October 2009, the Bill Zachary was introduced in the House of Commons, proposing significant changes to Canada's criminal law. This bill empowered judges to deny bail to individuals accused of serious crimes if they posed a threat to others. Brian and Beverly originally met at a mutual friend's party in the spring of 2001 when they were both attending college. From the very first moment, they felt a special connection. What started as friendship quickly blossomed into a deep relationship, making them inseparable. That summer, they grew even closer when they introduced each other to their families, who welcomed them warmly, recognizing that Brian and Beverly were a perfect match. Their shared passion for adventure has made them even more bonded to each other. Beverly was an energetic and athletic person, excelling in baseball and track, while also effortlessly playing the guitar and learning new languages. Her warm personality and bright smile endeared her to her friends. Brian had a love for thrills and enjoyed extreme sports like rock climbing, surfing, and scuba diving, always seeking new challenges without letting fear stop him. Despite their close relationship, they decided to wait until they completed their studies to get married. Once they graduated, they focused on building their future and saving for their own home. Brian started working for an industrial company, while Beverly pursued a career in hotel administration, where her language skills were an asset. On May 15, 2006, they exchanged vows in a stunning seaside ceremony surrounded by close family and friends. Their honeymoon was filled with adventures as they traveled to several countries before returning home to start their next chapter. They settled in the quiet town of Graham, Pennsylvania, purchasing a beautiful house near a river and a dense forest, an ideal place to establish their lives together. Brian continued his career as an engineer, while Beverly transitioned to translation work and pursued further studies. They quickly integrated into the local community, making friends and enjoying their peaceful new life. However, their happiness was short-lived. On the morning of November 17, 2007, Stephen, a longtime friend of Brian, arrived at Brian's house for a planned fishing trip. When he knocked on the door, no one answered. Initially, he thought Brian might be asleep, so he knocked again, louder this time, but still received no response. Feeling uneasy after about half an hour of waiting in his car and trying to call without success, Stephen decided to go fishing alone. As the day went on with no news from Brian or Beverly, Stephen became increasingly concerned. That evening, he returned to their house and knocked again, but again there was silence. Feeling more worried, he decided to investigate further. He walked around the property and looked through the windows, but the house was dark, which felt wrong to him. When he reached the garage, he saw that Brian and Beverly's car was parked inside. This puzzled him. If they were home, why weren't they responding? He approached the living room window and pressed his face against the glass, trying to see inside. Although the dim light made it hard to see, something on the floor caught his eye. The television was upside down, and next to it lay a large, motionless object. Stephen's heart raced. He quickly ran to his car, grabbed his flashlight, and aimed it through the window. What he saw sent chills down his spine. Two bodies lay motionless on the floor, partially covered by a blood-stained blanket. In a panic, he reached for his phone and called 911. His voice trembled as he reported what he had just witnessed, urging the authorities to come immediately. He waited outside, unable to look away from the tragic sight. When the police arrived, Stephen was the first to be questioned. He recounted everything: the planned fishing trip, the unanswered calls, and the horrifying discovery. He felt a rush of regret, wishing he had checked the windows sooner. Inside the house, the scene was grim. The front door was unlocked and showed no signs of forced entry, raising suspicions. In the living room, the bodies of Brian and Beverly lay motionless, just as Stephen had envisioned. Initial findings indicated that they had been dead for at least 12 hours, each having suffered 3 gunshot wounds from a large-caliber weapon. The accuracy of the shot suggested that the assailant acted deliberately and was likely someone experienced. But what was the motive behind this act? There were no signs of robbery, nothing had been taken. Their wallets, phones, and cash were left untouched. There were also no indications of a struggle, as if the assailant had come with one purpose: execution. One concerning issue is that the bodies were moved after the murders took place. Blood smeared across the floor revealed drag marks, and the attacker had made a clumsy attempt to clean up, leaving smudged streaks of blood on the walls and furniture that illustrated the horrifying incident that had unfolded. Despite attempts to eliminate evidence, forensic specialists were able to piece together what had happened. 6 spent shell casings were found at the scene, indicating that one person fired all the shots. This suggested that a single individual was responsible for the crime. The unlocked door raised an alarming question. Brian and Beverly had apparently allowed their killer inside willingly. Investigators surmised that Brian had answered the door and recognized the visitor. It is believed that as he turned to invite them in, he was unexpectedly shot in the back 3 times. One bullet went through him, shattering a nearby television, which then crashed to the floor. The sound likely drew Beverly out of the bedroom. Upon seeing her husband's lifeless body and the armed intruder, she may have frozen in terror. She attempted to flee but was shot from behind, collapsing in the hallway. Her body was later moved to the living room next to Brian's. Both Brian and Beverly were still in their pajamas, which indicated that they had been attacked early in the morning before starting their day. One puzzling aspect is that the murderer covered the bodies with a blanket. Could this be an act of remorse, or merely an attempt to conceal the crime? No one can be certain. The floor was covered in blood, as if someone had tried to clean it up, only making the situation worse. A large blood stain near the bodies showed signs of being disturbed, as if someone had attempted to scrub it away. Behind the couch, the police found a plastic broom with dried blood stuck to its bristles. However, the broom handle had been thoroughly wiped clean to remove any fingerprints. This indicated that the killer used the broom to wipe away bloody footprints while making sure to remove any evidence of their identity. Smudged handprints and palm prints were found on the walls, doors, and furniture, but they were too distorted to provide useful matches. Despite the killer's efforts to disguise their presence, forensic experts understood that the longer someone remains at a crime scene, the higher the chance of leaving behind incriminating evidence. Then, they discovered a critical clue. On the blanket covering Brian and Beverly's bodies, there was a faint boot print, not a bloodstain, but an impression made on a lightly bloodied area. The pattern was unique. Forensic analysis revealed it belonged to a rare model of heavy-duty work boots. Investigators traced these boots to a construction company in Clearfield County that had recently purchased several pairs. This lead allowed them to focus on employees who had access to the footwear. An important breakthrough occurred when detectives found a fingerprint on a surface within the house. They thoroughly examined it and checked it against law enforcement databases, but there was no match. This meant that the suspect had no criminal record and had never been fingerprinted, which complicated the identification process. The prime suspect quickly became Stephen, the friend who discovered the bodies. He had visited the house twice that day and was the one who alerted the authorities, raising suspicions about his involvement. During questioning, Stephen appeared visibly upset. He stated that he thought Brian and Beverly were still asleep when they didn't answer the door that morning. It was only later, when he still couldn't contact them, that he went back to check on them. He was taken aback when he realized he was being considered a suspect. He asserted that he had been fishing alone at a remote spot by the river all day. However, without anyone there to confirm his alibi, he had no proof. The investigators, however, had resources to verify his claims. They reviewed traffic camera footage from the roads leading to the fishing area, which confirmed that Stephen's timeline was accurate. He was where he claimed to be. Additional forensic tests also exonerated him. His fingerprints did not match any found at the crime scene, and tests for gunshot residue on his hands and clothes were negative. Moreover, the boot print found at the crime scene was not the same size as Stephen's shoes, and he had no ties to the construction company that produced the boots. Because there was no physical evidence connecting him to the crime, he was officially excluded as a suspect. Detectives searched the neighborhood for new leads. At the home of Daniel Tavares and his wife, Jennifer Lynn, who lived across from Brian and Beverly, they gathered important information. Daniel answered the door and informed them that Jennifer was at work, but he was willing to talk. He remembered that on the morning of the murders, around 5:30 a.m., he heard loud noises coming from Brian and Beverly's house. At the time, he didn't think much of it, but later he realized those noises sounded like gunshots. Curious yet cautious, Daniel looked out the window and saw a white pickup truck parked near Brian and Beverly's home, which he was certain did not belong to them. Shortly after, he noticed two men leaving the house. Due to the low light before dawn, he couldn't see them clearly, but he observed some details about the driver. The man was white, about 40 years old, with a strong build, long dark hair tied in a ponytail, and a mustache. Daniel also noted that the driver had a tattoo on his left hand, though he could not identify the design. Despite this promising lead, no other neighbors reported seeing the truck or its occupants. During interviews, Beverly's mother mentioned the concerning conversation she had with Beverly months earlier. Beverly expressed discomfort about a neighbor named Jeremy Flynn. Jeremy, a 22-year-old, had a troubling reputation for dealing in banned substances and was known to attract shady visitors. Many neighbors had raised concerns about him, and investigators labeled him as a person of interest. When officers visited his home, they found it abandoned, leading them to suspect he might have fled after the murders. Additionally, local residents shared information about a possible motive. Just before the killings, Brian and Beverly had hosted a small gathering. Jeremy, who was uninvited and heavily intoxicated, barged in. Witnesses described him as erratic and aggressive, making Beverly uncomfortable, insulting guests, and causing conflicts. After a heated argument, he was forced to leave, but not before he issued a menacing threat. Brian and Beverly would regret humiliating him. The next morning, Brian and Beverly realized that several items, including a cell phone and a handgun with ammunition, were missing from their home. They suspected that Jeremy was responsible for the theft, so they went to his house to confront him. They remained calm but warned Jeremy that they would report him to the authorities if their belongings were not returned. Jeremy denied taking anything and refused to give back the stolen items. However, the next day, the missing items mysteriously appeared in their backyard. Although they had no proof, Brian and Beverly believed that Jeremy had sneaked onto their property at night to return them. Even though it seemed like the issue was resolved, Beverly could not shake her anxiety. She began to feel unsafe being home alone and encouraged Brian to consider moving to a different neighborhood. Days later, after the murders occurred, Jeremy returned, and detectives promptly questioned him. Initially, they were suspicious, but their concerns diminished when they discovered that Jeremy had been out of town during the crime. He had gone to visit his parents in another state and had stayed there for nearly a week, returning only the day after the murders. His alibi was solid, confirmed by multiple witnesses who saw him miles away on the night of the crime. Further forensic analysis supported his innocence. His fingerprints were not found at the crime scene, and he had no connection to the distinctive work boots that investigators linked to the case. Since there is no evidence linking him to the murders, he was cleared as a suspect. In their search for a new breakthrough, investigators decided to return to the only witness who had provided useful information, Daniel Tavares. Daniel had originally reported seeing a suspicious white pickup truck near Brian and Beverly's home around the time of the crime. However, when detectives interviewed him again, his account changed. He suddenly claimed that he remembered what the suspects were wearing, even describing one man as having a scar on his cheek. This contradicted his earlier statement, in which he had said that the men's faces were hidden by hoodies. Detectives, sensing inconsistencies in his story, asked him to show them the window he had looked out of that morning. Upon examining the view, they found that even in broad daylight, it was difficult to see anything clearly across the street. Given that the murders had occurred before dawn, it seemed unlikely that Daniel could have seen that much. His inconsistent story raised an unsettling question: was he being dishonest? If so, what was his motive? A closer look into Daniel's background revealed a troubling history. Born in 1966 to a strict military family, his early life was marked by difficulties. When he was 4, his parents divorced, leaving him and his 3 older sisters with their mother. His father remarried quickly and became largely absent, showing little interest in his children's lives. By the time Daniel reached 9th grade, his life had taken a turn for the worse. He dropped out of school, frequently ran away from home, and engaged in petty theft. At 18, he was arrested for robbery for the first time. His estranged father intervened, helping him avoid jail by securing probation. Perhaps out of guilt and a desire to give his son a second chance, he supported Daniel, but Daniel wasted this opportunity. Over the years, he continued to spiral into crime, facing repeated arrests for theft and offenses related to banned substances. However, he mostly received light sentences. In the late 1980s, Daniel's father made a final effort to help him. He brought Daniel to Florida, paid for an expensive rehabilitation program, and helped him find a stable job. Unfortunately, this did not last. Within 6 months, Daniel was caught stealing again. His father then gave up and sent him back to his mother. By this point, Daniel's mental health had significantly declined. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia and prescribed medication, but he rarely followed the treatment plan. Instead, he mixed the medication with alcohol, resulting in violent and erratic behavior. In July 1991, a serious argument between Daniel and his mother escalated unexpectedly when he attacked her with a knife, resulting in her death before help could arrive. During his trial, Daniel claimed he was hearing voices, which could have supported an insanity defense. However, psychiatric evaluations indicated that Daniel was fully aware of his actions, and he received a 20-year prison sentence. He was released on parole in 2006, serving significantly less time than anticipated. While in prison, Daniel began exchanging letters with Jennifer Lynn, and their correspondence developed into a romantic relationship. Jennifer remained faithful, eagerly awaiting his release. After he was paroled, they married, and Daniel moved into her home in the quiet town of Graham. Unfortunately, Daniel violated the terms of his parole by moving to another state. He should have been arrested immediately, but a combination of bureaucratic errors and police negligence allowed him to evade detection. A clerical mistake erased his fingerprints from law enforcement databases, rendering him virtually invisible to authorities. This error would later prove to be significant. Further investigation revealed an alarming fact. Daniel had briefly worked for the construction company that had purchased the rare work boots connected to the murder. However, the detectives lacked sufficient direct evidence to arrest him, and they must build a strong case before taking action. On November 24, 2007, detectives asked Daniel to come to the police station, claiming they needed his help to create composite sketches of possible suspects. Wanting to assist, he agreed and spent nearly an hour working on entirely fabricated sketches. While he was focused on this task, an officer entered and stated that they needed to take his fingerprints to eliminate him as a suspect. Daniel hesitated for a moment but then agreed, thinking there was no way his fingerprints could be linked to the crime scene. Soon after, an officer casually mentioned a significant finding. A bloody handprint had been discovered inside the home of Brian and Beverly. Daniel's demeanor changed. He became tense and nervously explained that he had visited their house in the past, which meant his fingerprints could be there. The officer reassured him, stating there was no need to worry, as the handprint was made with blood and belonged to the killer. At that point, a second detective brought up Daniel's criminal history, asking him about the crime for which he had been imprisoned. Daniel confessed to killing his mother, but what followed surprised the investigators. Instead of showing remorse, he recounted the murder in a detailed and chilling manner, smiling while describing the attack and exhibiting an unsettling detachment, almost as if he were boasting about a proud achievement. Meanwhile, forensic analysts completed their work and confirmed that the bloody handprint from the crime scene matched Daniel Tavares's fingerprints. Detectives confronted him with this evidence. Instantly, his smug demeanor vanished, his hands clenched into fists, and his expression darkened with rage. Before he could react, officers restrained him and arrested him. Confronted with irrefutable proof, Daniel realized he had no escape and finally confessed to what had happened that morning. He explained that the night before, he had spent hours drinking heavily and using banned substances. By the time he ran out of money, he was belligerent and aggressive, leading the bar staff to throw him out and threaten to call the police if he caused any more trouble. Feeling furious and humiliated, Daniel fixated on an irrational thought, that Brian owed him money. Daniel had previously given Brian a tattoo as a favor, and in his intoxicated state, he convinced himself he deserved $50 for it. Determined to get that $50 back, he went to Brian's house at 5 a.m. When Brian answered the door, he was groggy and annoyed at being awakened so early. Daniel demanded payment for the tattoo, but Brian, confused, refused, telling him to return when he was sober. Daniel insisted and didn't want to argue. Brian sighed and walked away to get some cash, hoping it would make Daniel leave. However, as Brian turned, he made an offhand comment that Daniel perceived as an insult. In a fit of rage, Daniel drew his weapon and attacked Brian 3 times in the back. Beverly woke up to the sound of gunfire and quickly dashed out of the bedroom. She discovered her husband lying motionless on the floor, blood covering his body. She froze, looking directly at Daniel, who was still holding the smoking revolver. Understanding the danger, she attempted to run but was shot 3 times in the back before she could escape. After committing the horrific act, Daniel panicked and returned home to awaken his wife, Jennifer. Instead of showing shock or horror, she calmly agreed to help him cover up the crime. They returned to Brian's house, where Jennifer helped move Beverly's body into the living room next to Brian and then covered it with a blanket. Jennifer suggested using a broom to erase the bloody footprints and cleaned every surface meticulously, but she missed one crucial spot. Once they finished cleaning, Daniel disposed of the murder weapon by throwing it into a nearby river, and despite extensive searches, it was never found. With his confession and forensic evidence against him, Daniel was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Jennifer, claiming she acted out of fear, cooperated with the police and received a 1-year sentence for tampering with evidence. The case appeared to be resolved, but Daniel Tavares's troubling history continued to unfold. In 2015, new homeowners renovating the house where Daniel had lived with his mother discovered human remains when they dug up the backyard. Forensic analysis confirmed that the bones belonged to a young woman who had vanished in 1990. Investigators revealed a disturbing truth: Daniel had known her, as she was a neighbor. When she rejected his advances, he resorted to deadly violence and buried her body in his mother's backyard, where it remained hidden for years. This new evidence led to Daniel receiving a second life sentence. It became evident that Daniel Tavares had always been a predator operating in the shadows, evading justice until the truth finally caught up with him. After the tragic murder of Brian and Beverly Mock, the flaws in the justice system became evident. Daniel Tavares, a dangerous criminal with a serious history of violence, including the murder of his own mother, was released too soon. His early release, combined with the removal of his fingerprint information from the police database, allowed him to evade responsibility and continue his attacks. This negligence directly resulted in the deaths of Brian and Beverly, who were two innocent victims. When the case was concluded, Brian and Beverly's family faced immense grief and a lasting sense of injustice, forever haunted by the reality that their deaths could have been entirely prevented. Kiana and Ronald Burns got married in 2015 in a luxurious wedding. They organized colorful dances, treat guests to first-class food, and ensure that the celebration has the highest quality of service. At that time, no one could have guessed that years later, their relationship would be ruined. Unfortunately, in the end, their deteriorated relationship culminated not in a breakup but in a tragic crime. Everything happened in Atlanta, the capital of Georgia, USA. Atlanta is a large city with a rich history where culture, industry, and entertainment are well developed. Moreover, the city has pleasant weather, which is why it attracts many tourists and people looking for permanent residence. However, in addition to this, the city is also known for its troubling crime statistics. The crime rate in Atlanta is 2.5 times higher than the national average, and even with frequent crimes, the city was still shocked by the events that unfolded on November 6, 2021. The police received an alarming call reporting that a married couple had been found dead in their home. It turned out that one spouse had killed the other and then taken their own life. Kiana, who was 44 at the time, shot her husband, 40-year-old Ronald Burns, just before 9 p.m. This shocking story deeply affected the public, had a serious impact on those close to Kiana and Ronald's. Their family was heartbroken, but the most affected were their 8 children, who were suddenly left orphaned. Fortunately, all 8 of their children were not at home at the time of the tragedy and did not witness the horrifying scene. Kiana and Ronald were a wealthy and fairly well-known couple who jointly owned several businesses, including a beauty salon and several online schools. Additionally, they led an active social life, frequently posting updates on social media. It seemed as if everything was going well for them. They had a large family, but then this terrible crime occurred. Many people around them could not understand or accept the reasons behind such an act and were shocked by the turn of events. What prompted Kiana to commit such an act? The answer to this question turned out to be quite complex. To begin with, it is worth mentioning Kiana's background. She was born on September 15, 1977, and spent most of her early childhood in Missouri. From a young age, she knew she wanted to succeed in life, so after graduating from high school, she decided to study cosmetology. Once she enrolled, she realized she had made the right choice. She had a real talent for her craft, worked well with her hands, and easily made new connections. Soon after completing her studies, her work was appreciated by the residents of St. Louis. Her business is growing steadily. It developed into one of the most successful beauty salons in St. Louis. By that time, she had opened a second location, had no shortage of clients or employees. Both her business and herself were flourishing. As for her husband, Ronald was born on May 14, 1975. He was tall, had a good physique, and considered himself a successful businessman. During his high school years, Ronald developed an interest in basketball, which played a significant role in his life. He participated in the state championship in 1994, was known as a goal-oriented and competitive player. Perhaps it was this competitive spirit that drove him to seek self-improvement. While Kiana was busy building her career, Ronald turned his attention to multi-level marketing companies and other questionable schemes, believing they would lead him to success. Despite his inclination towards dubious business practices, Ronald was skilled at networking and building beneficial connections. He even began preaching Christianity in a company he founded to expand his reach to the public. In fact, Kiana was not Ronald's first wife. Previously, he was married to a woman named Evis. However, this marriage lacked love. Despite appearing well-groomed and successful, Ronald was unhappy. All his business ventures failed. He had met Evis while trying to deceive her with one of his scams, but fortunately, she refused him. Additionally, at the time he met Evis, Ronald was already involved in another relationship. However, due to fate or perhaps his newfound relationship, cracks began to show in this marriage. In 2016, they participated in a popular reality show, Divorce Court, to address their family issues. Their story was broadcasted, and Ronald attempted to portray himself as an innocent victim of the relationship. However, it was clear to everyone that he was a narcissistic and deceitful individual. In fact, he admitted on camera to cheating on his wife, although it remains unclear with whom. Many believe he was already involved with Kiana at that time. Evis, on her part, claimed that Ronald was irresponsible with money, often spending her funds recklessly, and could not maintain a full-time job. Ultimately, Ronald divorced Evis and quickly entered into a relationship with Kiana. Kiana was of great interest to Ronald because she was a successful careerist. She had an established business by the time they met. Ronald wanted to take part in her success. As for Kiana, she was attracted to Ronald because of his confidence, ability to find and establish useful connections. Both saw each other as ideal partners for creating a successful business, then decided to enter into a relationship, eventually leading to their marriage. On September 13, 2015, they officially became one family. They spared no expense for the celebration, inviting a large number of guests and renting a huge banquet hall. Given that both spouses had enormous egos, it is not surprising that they chose to have such a lavish celebration. From Kiana's side, Ronald appeared as an incredibly successful person who, when joined with her, could truly create something worthwhile. Additionally, Kiana's financial stability and Ronald's experience seemed like a winning combination. However, these expectations were not met. All their business ventures eventually collapsed, except for Kiana's beauty salon. From that moment on, despite Ronald's lack of income, he began to convince everyone around him that he was a successful businessman. His social media posts often portrayed a flattering image that successfully concealed their dire financial situation. Those who feel the need to brag about their success and luxury are often the most insecure individuals. Ronald and Kiana used their luxurious lifestyle to mask their problems, often sharing happy photos together. For example, on May 6, 2020, Kiana posted on Instagram about her husband gifting her a new Maserati Levant. Their posts highlighted how they attended expensive parties, traveled, enjoyed life, with Kiana always impeccably dressed with styled hair and makeup. In turn, Ronald frequently posted about his business endeavors, claiming that everything he took on was successful and profitable. Both spouses, as devout Christians, added quotes from the Bible or other sacred texts to their posts. They also shared photos from their luxurious mansion, showcasing their wealth and family life in detail. However, these images were just a facade. Their family was experiencing significant difficulties. For several years before the events described, Ronald worked for an American marketing insurance company that engaged in fraudulent activities aimed at extorting money from middle and low-income families. In fact, he even tried to involve family members, friends, and parishioners in this scheme to elevate his status within the company. Ronald clearly did not earn enough from this venture to support his family, and his divorce in 2014 revealed that he could not afford even the minimal monthly payments of $250. Unfortunately, instead of acknowledging his financial shortcomings, he believed that all he needed was financial support to get back on his feet. He thought that by using his wife's money, He could promote both himself and her in society. Nothing would deter him from pursuing his goals, even if it involved misusing Kiana's earnings to invest in the business he had always dreamed of. Shortly thereafter, advertisements for his financial consulting firms, called Seafig Ambition and Leg Financial Solutions, appeared on his social networks. The pages contained photos of Ronald and Kiana posing with products and attending conferences, and included testimonials from supposedly satisfied clients. Ultimately, these companies were not successful either, as Ronald merely spent Kiana's money to finance ideas that never materialized. It is also important to note that both spouses were not young, carefree individuals, but rather had significant obligations. Despite the evidence that Ronald's business was failing and draining their already limited finances, they continued to convince those around them that their new venture was successful, portraying themselves as prosperous entrepreneurs. Their personal image as a successful couple was closely tied to their excessive pride and self-esteem. Their environment did not suspect the true state of affairs, therefore they were ready to do anything to maintain that perception. Additionally, in the comments under their videos on YouTube and on other social networks, people admired their business and their family as a whole. Kiana and Ronald believed that they were about to achieve the financial success they had dreamed of through their efforts, refused to notice or admit the truth. In fact, their arrogance was so strong that they even filmed a series about themselves. All the money that they managed to earn was immediately spent on their supposedly luxurious lifestyle and on the desire to appear to be someone they were not. Such extravagance ultimately led to their near bankruptcy. On December 19, 2019, Ronald filed an official application for Chapter 10 bankruptcy. In this type of bankruptcy, they had to liquidate some of their assets to pay off their debts, resulting in a loss of about $20,000. Although this amount seemed significant, their total debt was much greater. During their short marriage, they found themselves mired in nearly $500,000 of debt, which they could not escape. While these troubles unfolded in their lives, Ronald and Kiana continued to pretend that nothing was happening. They maintained the facade of a happy family and successful entrepreneurs, but in reality, this did not help them stay afloat. By this time, they were nothing more than swindlers and liars. To continue this performance, Ronald decided that their family should move to a larger city, hoping he could deceive more people. This turned out to be another misguided and disastrous decision on his part, as Kiana's successful business was still located in their hometown and was the only source of income for the family. Unfortunately, Kiana again agreed to move. In 2021, the Burns family relocated to Atlanta, Georgia. Given their circumstances, any other family in their position would have chosen more modest and economical options for moving, but the Burns family continued to squander money. They rented a luxurious mansion with 5 bedrooms in the wealthy suburb of Sandy Springs. Moreover, they did not disclose on social media that they were renting the house. Instead, they assured their followers that they had bought it, using money earned from their businesses. Now, in addition to cars, clothes, and the fabricated smiles of the Burns family, the mansion was another expensive addition. It was clear that all of Ronald's attempts to stay afloat had suffered another defeat because, in reality, his business ideas had been failures from the start. Meanwhile, Kiana faced challenges in adapting to their new surroundings. She felt completely isolated from her friends and business contacts. Additionally, the relationship in their marriage began to deteriorate sharply. Ronald resumed cheating on Kiana, which further undermined their relationship. In fact, Ronald was primarily interested in her money. At one point, he even published a video on social media in which he lamented the difficulties in his marriage. Although the video was later deleted, it led to a major argument between him and Kiana, nearly resulting in divorce. This revelation shocked their subscribers, but it became clear to everyone what kind of person Ronald was. Upon careful listening, it became apparent that his primary concern was his business and the money he stood to lose along with the divorce. Now that they had neither love nor money left, both were thoroughly disillusioned with each other. Their carefully constructed image began to exert even greater pressure on them. Kiana likely felt that she should have ended the marriage and returned to life without Ronald, but for some reason, she continued to stay with him. After moving to Atlanta and discovering Ronald's infidelity, she also found herself another man. The irony is that despite Ronald's own infidelities, he considered Kiana's betrayal to be unforgivable and filed for divorce. In the documents filed on October 10, 2021, Ronald cited Kiana's infidelity as the reason for the divorce, while their family and friends were completely unaware of it. He concealed the truth from the public. If he were to announce about his wife's infidelity, it would clearly not contribute to his image as a successful person. Kiana, however, did not hide the fact that something was wrong in their marriage. She stopped mentioning her husband on her Facebook page and soon began to post only selfies and videos of herself. Among her posts was a video from a club, making it clear that Kiana was there alone. This was Kiana's most overt statement about the problems in their marriage. On October 20th, 10 days after Ronald filed for divorce, Kiana went live on Facebook to talk about something much more serious. The bright smile she often showed was now replaced by the expression of a worried woman. It became obvious that she was not in the best condition, and many began to worry about her, not without reason. After that day, Kiana's condition worsened dramatically. Just 3 days later, on October 23rd, she wrote on her page, "God is my witness, I would do anything to wake up from this nightmare. God, I need strength." Kiana was on the verge of a nervous breakdown and clearly could no longer stand the hell that surrounded her every day. She was left completely alone in a new city. Her business and family remained in St. Louis. The business she believed in had failed, and besides, the husband in whom she had invested so much no longer loved her. Kiana sincerely believed that there was no way out of this nightmare. Unfortunately, this situation ended in the most terrible way imaginable. On November 6, 2021, the serene silence of the wealthy Sandy Springs area was broken. First, screams were heard from the Burns house, and a little later, shots were fired. The police were alerted soon after one of Ronald's daughters reported domestic violence. A little later, Kiana herself called the police, telling them that she had just shot her husband and asking them to send help as soon as possible. Although the police and ambulance arrived quickly, it turned out that after the call, Kiana attacked herself as well. At this time, Kiana was still alive, however, they could not save her. That day, both Kiana and Ronald died. Although the details of what actually happened in that house remain a mystery, it is clear that the spouses had been arguing for some time, and during the quarrel, Kiana pulled out a weapon. What ultimately led to this tragedy shocked everyone. The self-confident, promiscuous swindler took everything he could from his wife, who was too proud and angry to let him go. As a result, both spouses died. Their reputation, which they had cared so much about over the last few years, would now be revealed to their subscribers, who would come to know the kind of people they truly were. That they had lied to themselves and others all this time. Yes, Kiana and Ronald managed to hide their secrets until the very moment of death, but it was clearly not worth it. Now their 8 children will grow up without parents, and the truth about Kiana and Ronald has finally come out. Kathleen West was born on February 15, 1975, in Tampa, Florida, USA, as the only daughter of Nancy and John Martin. She was raised in a loving environment and her favorite activity was playing with dolls. As a high school teenager, she began her journey into the modeling industry. By the early 2000s, she was making a living as an exotic dancer. However, during this time, Kathleen frequently faced difficulties in her personal life, particularly in navigating unhealthy relationships. Kathleen developed a strong admiration for Marilyn Monroe, trying to emulate the iconic actress in various aspects of her life. However, she also faced struggles similar to Monroe's, such as depression, insecurity, and self-doubt. In response to these challenges, she sought therapy but still found herself overwhelmed by darkness, which led her to seek comfort in alcohol. Her friends and family, including her mother, noted that she sometimes drank alone after parties when everyone else had left. In 2004, during the Super Bowl celebrations, Kathleen met William Jeffrey West, an Army veteran who was 2 years her senior and the son of Carolyn and William West. Known as Jeffrey, he worked as a recruiter in the Army and was instantly drawn to Kathleen's beauty. His efforts to win her heart were successful, and she described him to her friends as the romantic partner of her dreams, the knight she had always hoped to find. Many believe he filled a void in her life and boosted her confidence. After a brief romance that began in 2004, they got married in Las Vegas. Brittany Driesler, who later became friends with them, commented that at first they seemed like an ill-matched couple. However, opposites attract, and Brittany found it hard to believe that someone like Kathleen could fall for Jeffrey. Nonetheless, one thing was clear: they were deeply in love. In 2005, they had a daughter named Logan, affectionately called Lola. From that point on, Kathleen devoted herself to raising her daughter, while Jeffrey took care of their financial needs. During their years together, they got matching tattoos on their wrists that symbolized their enduring love. They often ended their text messages with declarations of love for each other. After being together for 10 years, the family relocated to Calera, Alabama, about 10 miles south of Birmingham, so that Logan could be closer to her grandparents. Jeffrey took a job as a police officer at a local university, while Kathleen focused on being a homemaker and frequently shared updates on social media. A few years later, when a platform for adult content featuring sign models emerged, Kathleen found an opportunity to publish and sell her photos online. This allowed her to showcase a fun side of her personality, often with her husband taking the photographs. Those close to them noticed that Jeffrey did not feel embarrassed or jealous about her new hobby. However, like any relationship, theirs had its challenges. By the end of 2017, Kathleen had successfully undergone breast augmentation surgery, and they enjoyed a peaceful Christmas and New Year surrounded by family. During this time, Jeffrey earned the respect of Kathleen's parents, who welcomed him as part of the family, and Kathleen was equally embraced by his relatives. On Wednesday, January 10, 2018, Nancy and John took Kathleen for a checkup following her recent surgery, and everything seemed normal. 2 days later, on the evening of Friday, January 12, 2018, Kathleen and Jeffrey stopped at a store to buy alcohol after dining out. Security cameras recorded them purchasing a bottle of whiskey and a bottle of absinthe, with Kathleen appearing happy and relaxed. Once they returned home, they continued drinking, and Jeffrey even shared a photo of one of the bottles on social media. As they enjoyed each other's company, Jeffrey took several pictures of Kathleen, who was dressed in a pink bra, colorful panties, and high-heeled shoes. Eventually, a fight broke out between them. Under the influence of alcohol, Jeffrey expressed his frustration about Kathleen spending more time on her phone than interacting with him. In a moment of rage, he grabbed her phone and threw it outside. When Kathleen saw her phone in the street, she went outside to look for it, barefoot and in just her pink bra, completely unaware of the winter cold. At that moment, Jeffrey, heavily intoxicated, picked up a bottle and struck Kathleen on the head, delivering a fatal blow. Realizing she was no longer alive filled him with shock and fear about the consequences of finding a dead body near their home. An Army veteran helped him devise a plan. He staged the scene to look like an accident by placing a bottle of absinthe on Kathleen's broken phone and then went back inside the house, leaving the front door open. The next morning, Saturday, January 13, 2018, a neighbor named Makorsha Purifoy was driving to work when she discovered Kathleen's partially naked body in the street. Terrified, she called emergency services and mentioned seeing someone moving inside Kathleen's house. When paramedics arrived, they found that Kathleen had suffered severe head trauma from a blunt object. Half an hour later, experienced Police Sergeant Mike Melhoff examined the scene and quickly noticed 2 items near Kathleen's body. It appeared that the placement of the phone and the bottle had been staged. Additionally, 2 stains indicated that the body had been moved after the incident. After authorities found Kathleen's body, Jeffrey appeared at the door, claiming that he had been awakened by the sound of police sirens. Shelby County Medical Examiner Lena Evans arrived at the scene after being called by the police. Upon assessing the situation, she agreed with Agent Mike that the arrangement of objects at the scene appeared unusual. When Mike had a brief conversation with Kathleen's husband, Jeffrey, he noticed that Jeffrey seemed cold and detached. Initially, Mike thought this might be due to Jeffrey's personality and profession. Jeffrey explained that around 2 a.m., he had gone to bed because of pain from an old leg injury he sustained while in the army, leaving his wife to celebrate alone. Although he admitted his memory was unclear due to alcohol, he remembered feeling irritated when his wife kept looking at her phone and throwing the device out of the house. Later, when the authorities informed Jeffrey's parents and Kathleen about the tragic news, they were unaware of the true cause of her death and sought comfort from Jeffrey. Detectives found no clear evidence that Jeffrey had harmed Kathleen and decided to investigate her background instead. On January 14, 2018, a forensic specialist confirmed that Kathleen died from blunt force trauma and noted that the 2-inch wound on the side of her head could not have been caused by an accidental fall, especially since there were no objects nearby that she could have hit. The examination also indicated that Kathleen likely tried to crawl away before dying. In terms of substances, only alcohol was detected in her blood, at levels nearly 3 times the legal driving limit. Toxicology tests of her urine and other fluids revealed that her alcohol level had been even higher at some point that night. The investigation found fingerprints from both Kathleen and Jeffrey at the scene, which was expected since they had spent the night together. As a result, the focus of the investigation shifted to Kathleen's social circle. The investigation gained momentum when detectives discovered Kathleen's active presence on social media, including an adult website. One early theory suggested that a fan may have become obsessed with her, possibly leading to her death. To explore this possibility, the team examined her contacts and followers, but this approach quickly yielded no credible suspects. Meanwhile, Jeffrey accompanied Kathleen's parents, Nancy and John, to the funeral home to assist with the arrangements. While choosing a coffin, John noticed his son-in-law in tears, struggling to cope. At that moment, John felt the pain of Jeffrey, whom he regarded as a son and who had unexpectedly become a widower. As the investigation progressed, the detectives began to view Jeffrey differently than Kathleen's family did. They grew suspicious of his potential jealousy regarding her revealing online posts and decided to question him again about his feelings on the matter. To their surprise, Jeffrey admitted that he had actually assisted her in taking the photos that her many online subscribers viewed and purchased. Notably, Agent Mike observed that Jeffrey seemed emotionally detached throughout this conversation. Detectives identified a contradiction in Jeffrey's account. Security footage revealed that the door was opened hours later than he had claimed, exactly 9 minutes before 2 a.m. on Saturday. To further investigate, they sought a search warrant for Jeffrey's phone. Once granted, investigators discovered an app tracking physical activity, which provided valuable insights. The data showed that after 11 p.m., just 30 minutes after Jeffrey claimed to be in bed, he took 18 steps. Additionally, a review of his messages uncovered arguments between him and Kathleen, including discussions about their declining relationship. However, those close to them argued that this correspondence reflected typical issues in a long-term relationship and insisted that there was no evidence of a crime. With the investigation stalled, detectives revisited the 911 call made by a neighbor, Makorsha Purifoy. They confirmed that the silhouette she saw moving back and forth was indeed Jeffrey, contradicting his claim that he had been awoken by ambulance sirens. This prompted a forensic expert to re-examine the absinthe bottle that had initially caught their attention due to a chip on the bottom, suggesting it had struck something or someone. The discovery of Jeffrey's fingerprints on the bottle, especially in a location that indicated it could have been used as a weapon, significantly changed the direction of the case. As a result, on February 22, 2018, Jeffrey was arrested for the murder of his wife, Kathleen. His bail was set at $500,000, and he maintained his innocence throughout the process. Shortly after his arrest, Agent Sean Lumley held a press conference, but during this challenging time, John and Nancy continued to support their son-in-law. The most vocal supporter was William, Jeffrey's father, who firmly believed in his son's love for his family. Before the trial began, the prosecution offered Jeffrey a plea deal that would result in a minimum sentence and 2 years of supervised release. However, Jeffrey refused to accept any compromise, opting instead to prove his innocence in front of a jury. The trial, overseen by Shelby County Judge Bill Bach, began in mid-November 2020. This case was unique for prosecutors Neil McCoy and Ben Fair because Kathleen's family supported the accused. However, due to the judge's ban on video recording in the courtroom, no audio-visual records were made of the proceedings. Following the prosecution's presentation of the evidence, the defense, led by attorney John Robbins, presented their interpretation of the events. Robbins argued that, despite some disagreements, Kathleen and Jeffrey had never engaged in serious quarrels or made threats of violence. He highlighted correspondence between the spouses that included plans for their evening together and affectionate messages. The defense highlighted that no DNA evidence, including blood or brain tissue, was found on the alcohol bottle, Jeffrey's clothing, or his hands. Additionally, there was no evidence of a fight or struggle inside the house. Addressing the prosecution's claim that Jeffrey appeared unemotional, the defense attorney argued that everyone reacts to stress and trauma differently, that Jeffrey's reaction was influenced by his military training. However, the testimony from Stephen Boudreau, a physician from the Alabama Department of Forensic Medicine, was particularly impactful. When questioned by prosecutor Ben Fair about the likelihood of a serious injury occurring from a fall, Stephen firmly stated that it was virtually impossible. In his conclusion, he mentioned that the object believed to have caused Kathleen's death had a blade but was not sharp. Over the next 4 days, the trial included various testimonies, including one from Kathleen's mother, who stated that her daughter often drank excessively and engaged in risky behavior. On November 20th, 2020, Jeffrey was scheduled to testify in his defense but later communicated through his family to the judge that he had chosen to remain silent. Subsequently, the closing arguments from both the prosecution and defense took place around 5 p.m. Before the jury began deliberations, the judge informed them that, in addition to the manslaughter charge, they could also consider the charge of intentional murder as requested by the prosecutor. The defense objected to this and urged the jury to consider the lesser charge of manslaughter. The judge did not accept this request. After nearly 5 hours, around 10 p.m., the jury returned with a verdict, finding Jeffrey guilty of the lesser charge of manslaughter. He maintained a calm demeanor, showing no signs of distress or defeat. Before the hearing concluded, the judge revoked Jeffrey's $500,000 bail, ordering that he remain in custody until sentencing. Jeffrey's attorney mentioned that his client was surprised by the verdict and, despite the significant setback, he would continue to strive for his innocence. Prosecutor Neal expressed disappointment at the court's decision. Although the sentencing hearing was initially set for January 11th, it took place nearly a month later, on February 8, 2021. In this trial, Kathleen's mother, Nancy, spoke out once again, calling for mercy for Jeffrey. She described him as a good man. At the same time, Carolyn, Jeffrey's mother, also spoke about the pain their family is facing due to the trial, emphasizing the importance of having a father for Logan. Before the sentencing, Jeffrey read a prepared statement expressing his sadness about missing important milestones in his daughter's life over the past 3 years. He paused, struggling to hold back his emotions, and mentioned how he and Kathleen's family supported each other during this difficult time. He concluded by referring to his wife without naming her, stating that he had lost his best friend. The judge, considering Jeffrey's 21 years of service in the U.S. Army and his clean criminal record, sentenced William Jeffrey West to 16 years in prison, with 3 years already counted as time served while awaiting trial. 3 days later, Carolyn and John gave an interview to a major American publication, where they collectively stated that they felt Jeffrey's trial was unjust. Since then, the grandparents have been sharing custody of their granddaughter, Logan. In January 2022, the Alabama Supreme Court rejected Jeffrey's appeal. In April 2015, in a remote, forested suburb near Penn, a town in Maharashtra, a man went out to collect firewood as usual but discovered something unusual. While combing through the underbrush, he noticed a large black plastic bag, partially hidden beneath a thin covering of dried leaves and soil. As he approached, a foul stench filled his nostrils, a combination of burning and decomposition. Alarmed by what he had found, he wasted no time in contacting emergency responders. Authorities from the Penn district arrived swiftly. The contents were unmistakably human remains, burned so extensively that facial features and physical identifiers had been destroyed. Only portions of the skeleton, including the skull, pelvis, and several long bones, had survived the blaze. There were no clothing remnants, documents, or personal items to suggest who this person had been. Forensic technicians noted the presence of what appeared to be gasoline at the scene, leading investigators to suspect a deliberate effort to destroy both body and evidence. The remains were transported to a forensic laboratory in Mumbai for examination. However, cross-referencing against missing persons reports yielded no match. There were no active cases in Mumbai or surrounding districts that aligned with the profile or estimated time of death. With no identity, no family inquiries, and no leads, the investigation quickly stalled. The case was marked as a cold case involving an unidentified body found in a rural area, but a lack of evidence and witnesses led to a failure of the investigation. Eventually, interest waned. No further forensic tests were ordered and the case was forgotten. For nearly 3 years, the mystery remained buried. Then, unexpectedly, the case was brought back to life during the interrogation of a suspect in a criminal case. While negotiating for leniency, the detainee accidentally revealed a chilling truth. He knew the identity of the individual whose charred body was found in the woods near Penn. His confession was not motivated by remorse, but by strategy. He offered the information as a bargaining chip. The remains, it turned out, belonged to Sheena Bora. Born in 1987 in Shillong, Sheena entered the world amid instability. Her mother, Indrani Mukherjee, and father, Siddhartha Das, were both young and deeply entangled in a strained relationship that was anything but stable. The birth of their daughter did little to mend their fractures. Neither parent stepped up to shoulder the responsibilities that came with raising a child. Not long after Sheena was born, a second child, a boy named Mikhail, was added to the family. But even the presence of 2 children couldn't hold the family together. The relationship between Indrani and Siddhartha collapsed soon after Mikhail's birth. The children were left in the care of their maternal grandparents, aging, modest-living relatives who quietly took on the role of guardians. While legally neither parent had given up custody, in practice, Sheena and Mikhail's upbringing was handled entirely by their grandparents. Though not wealthy, the household provided the essentials: food, shelter, education, and love. Siddhartha Das disappeared from their lives altogether. No letters. No calls. Meanwhile, Indrani moved to Kolkata, pursuing higher education and, from that point forward, cutting ties with her past. She never called, never wrote, and never sent support for her son and daughter. Despite the emotional void left by their absent parents, the grandparents did what they could. They enrolled the children in school and crafted gentle stories to help them understand, suggesting their parents were simply occupied with responsibilities. But as Sheena grew, so did her awareness. Her mother's absence became a trauma. She realized that her father had disappeared without explanation. Her mother had left on purpose. As a teenager, Sheena struggled with the pain of abandonment, struggling to understand why she had been abandoned. When Indrani left her childhood behind, it was as though she had severed all ties with the world she once knew. After completing her college education in Kolkata, she swiftly began to reinvent herself. Her next step was marrying Sanjeev Khanna, a well-established businessman based in the same city. This was the first marriage she officially acknowledged. Together, they founded a company and immersed themselves in the world of business. Sanjeev's financial stability has given Indrani a significant boost, not only professionally but also socially. The marriage granted her access to Kolkata's upper echelons, a world of influence and affluence. The couple also welcomed a daughter during this time. However, their union began to fracture under the weight of internal tensions. Personal disagreements soon spilled over into their business, leading to arguments and power struggles. By 2002, the relationship had reached a breaking point, and the two formally divorced. Although their marriage had ended, they still shared ownership of certain business interests. Rather than returning to Shillong, where her children Sheena and Mikhail remained in the care of her parents, Indrani instead chose to relocate to Mumbai. In Mumbai, she entered into a relationship with Peter Mukherjee, a high-profile media executive who, at the time, served as the CEO of one of India's most influential television networks. Their relationship progressed quickly and eventually culminated in marriage. Following her separation from Sanjeev, Indrani brought her daughter Vidhi to live with her and Peter. In time, Peter formally adopted the girl as his own. This union marked a turning point in Indrani's social ascent. With Peter by her side, she was welcomed into the inner circles of Mumbai's elite, rubbing shoulders with business magnates, media icons, and political influencers. Her public image was meticulously curated, a dynamic entrepreneur, a co-founder of successful ventures, and the spouse of a powerful media figure. In this new world, Indrani never spoke of her children from earlier relationships. To her colleagues and friends, Sheena and Mikhail didn't exist. In fact, not even her parents in Shillong knew the full details of her whereabouts, her second marriage, or the business empire she was assembling. In Mumbai's upscale neighborhood, Indrani has polished her image with precision. She attended exclusive galas, threw intimate soirees for industry leaders, and traveled internationally for conferences. She was known as a woman of sophistication and ambition, admired for her business acumen and connections. Her stability depends on one unbreakable rule: the past must remain hidden, especially the existence of Sheena. No one can know that she has a grown daughter. Even Peter, her husband at the time, had only a partial understanding of the truth. Indrani had introduced Sheena not as her daughter but as her much younger sister, someone she had helped raise. The two didn't reconnect until 2006, when Sheena, now a young woman, finally reached out on her own. One of the likely reasons Indrani chose to keep her past hidden was to safeguard the reputation she had so carefully constructed. Beyond concerns of status, there may have been financial motives as well. Officially acknowledging Sheena as her daughter might have raised questions about inheritance or claims to property. By 2006, Sheena had turned 19. With school behind her, she began contemplating what the next phase of her life might look like. Her grandparents, though loving and steadfast, were still struggling financially. Pursuing higher education was a distant dream, and her younger brother, Mikhail, who faced ongoing health challenges, needed care. But on her birthday that year, Sheena managed to track down a phone number linked to Indrani. She mustered up the courage to pick up the phone and call. That first conversation was cautious. Hearing her mother's voice after so many years stirred emotions Sheena had buried long ago. Indrani, speaking from Mumbai, casually described her life: a new marriage, a new family, and a thriving career. She gave no explanation for her absence, offered no apology, and displayed no visible remorse. Their exchange was civil, but emotionally flat. Sheena expressed a sincere desire to reconnect, to rebuild the relationship they had never really had. Indrani didn't say yes immediately. However, she finally agreed that Sheena could come to Mumbai, but only on one strict condition. No one, not colleagues, friends, or even family, could know that she was Indrani's daughter. She would have to assume the role of a much younger sister. There was no rationale provided for this condition. To anyone else, this would have seemed an unreasonable request. But for Sheena, the chance for a new life was too tempting. Mumbai promised a fresh start, but the price would be high. She would have to give up her name, her history. She left Shillong behind and relocated to Mumbai, where Indrani greeted her not as a mother, but as a guardian of sorts. From that moment forward, Sheena was publicly introduced as Indrani's younger sister. Among Indrani's elite circle, the story raised no eyebrows. Even within Peter Mukherjee's household, Indrani's second husband and a powerful media executive, the truth was kept hidden. Peter himself believed that Sheena was simply Indrani's sister, nothing more. Once in Mumbai, Sheena enrolled in a university. Her new life provided her with access to things that had always been out of reach: a formal education, safe housing, and a sense of material stability. Although she and Indrani now live in the same city, their interactions are carefully monitored. Indrani maintained tight control over every aspect of their relationship. Any attempt to deviate from the sister story was shut down immediately. Bringing up her childhood, her brother Mikhail, or her grandparents was strictly forbidden. In the beginning, Sheena tried to adapt. She reminded herself that this new life, though complicated, came with benefits she had never known. It was better than what she had before. But inside, she carries a weight, a longing for a mother-daughter bond that remains out of reach. Indrani remained emotionally distant, rarely offering comfort or warmth. Indrani's attention remained firmly on her current family, while Sheena often felt like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. There were no clear conversations about what the future might hold for Sheena. Her stay in Mumbai seemed indefinite yet undefined. Support from Indrani was inconsistent and unspoken, leaving Sheena in a limbo where any mention of money, housing, or long-term plans was met with indifference. Over time, Sheena came to understand the stark truth. She was entirely dependent on someone who refused to acknowledge her place in their life. Yet despite the emotional cost, Sheena chose to stay. The hope that things might eventually change anchored her. Just being near her mother, having a shot at education, and living in a city full of possibilities were powerful incentives. She wasn't looking for public acknowledgement. It was during these visits to Indrani's home that Sheena met Rahul Mukherjee, Peter's son from a previous relationship. Rahul was around Sheena's age and lived in the family home. Independent yet still under his father's control, Rahul sees in Sheena someone who understands the unspoken pressures of growing up under a watchful, controlling eye. They shared similar learning environments and interests. In a family filled with formality and unwritten rules, their friendship became a rare space of emotional freedom. Soon, their relationship gradually developed. They began to spend more time together. At first, Indrani appeared unaware of how close the two had become. Since they were often seen together at home or at university, no one questioned their closeness. But once Indrani realized the relationship had moved beyond casual friendship, her attitude shifted sharply. She openly disapproved and insisted that the romance come to an end immediately. The reason she gave was that such relationships, even without biological ties, were inappropriate within a family setting. Her objection was rooted in fear. If the relationship progressed, there was a real possibility that Sheena would reveal her true identity. Her secret will be exposed, endangering both her reputation and her position in society. At first, Indrani tried to steer Sheena gently, urging her to reconsider. When that didn't work, she became more forceful. Eventually, she took drastic action. She sent Sheena away, back to her grandparents in Shillong, hoping that distance and time would sever the emotional bond between her and Rahul. But the plan backfired. Rahul continued to call, text, and stay in touch. The forced distance made their feelings clearer and more determined. They made plans for the future, spoke often, and stayed emotionally close despite being miles apart. When Sheena returned to Mumbai, things had changed. She was no longer financially dependent on Indrani. With Rahul's help, she had secured housing and support for her daily needs. Indrani no longer has control over her life. Despite being pressured to end things, Sheena refused. Her relationship with Rahul continued. He, still unaware of the truth, believed her to be Indrani's younger sister, just as he had always been told. To him, their relationship was sincere, their future open, and there was no reason to believe that loving her would bring anything other than happiness. On the evening of April 24, 2012, Sheena had made plans to meet with Indrani, a rare encounter that, despite lingering tension, offered a glimmer of possibility. For Sheena, it was more than just a dinner. It was a chance, however slim, to mend a relationship that had been frayed by years of neglect. She had spent the day at work, and when her shift ended, Rahul came to pick her up. She mentioned her upcoming meeting with Indrani. That evening, Rahul took her to the agreed location. He dropped her off and said goodbye, then stood there for a moment, watching as she walked to a waiting car. Indrani was already inside. The driver was in the front seat, and there was someone else in the car whom Rahul did not recognize. Without hesitation, Sheena climbed into the car. Everything seemed normal. Rahul had no reason to worry. But that calm melted into worry as the night wore on. Sheena didn't return. He tried calling her, but there was no answer. Then, finally, a text message came. It was brief, saying that she was fine and had decided to stay the night with Indrani. On the surface, the message seemed reassuring, but something was off. The tone was cold, distant, very different from the Sheena he knew. Rahul responded, asking her to call him or at least leave a voicemail. But there was no reply. Several hours later, another message appeared. This time, it was even more jarring. Sheena, or someone claiming to be her, wrote that she was ending their relationship and asked him not to contact her again. The words were abrupt, almost mechanical. The message urged him to move on and forget her. Rahul was stunned. Only days before, they had been making plans for the future, talking about apartments, careers, and what came next. There had been no fights, no friction. He knew Sheena, knew how she handled stress, how she communicated. This sudden change in tone and content was not like her. A fear gripped him. He feared that those messages were not from Sheena at all. And if they weren't, then what happened after she got in that car? The next morning, Rahul took immediate action. He began reaching out to Indrani. At first, she didn't answer. When she eventually returned his call, her explanation was vague. She claimed Sheena had confided in her about wanting to break things off with Rahul and leave Mumbai. According to Indrani, she had encouraged Sheena to take a break and travel, to escape the pressure and figure things out. She confirmed that Sheena agreed, packed a few things and went abroad. The sudden silence and disappearance did not suit the woman he knew so well. Indrani's explanation seemed rehearsed, as if she had been waiting to give it. His instincts told him that something was very wrong. He kept reaching out, hoping for answers. Every time, he was met with the same story. Sheena had left of her own accord and didn't want to be contacted. A few days later, Rahul managed to speak with Peter Mukherjee. Peter echoed what Indrani had said, repeating that Sheena had moved on and didn't wish to be disturbed. But Rahul couldn't accept it. With a growing alarm, he turned to the police. He explained the situation, recounted the strange events of that night, and voiced his fears. But the authorities were unmoved. Sheena was an adult, they reminded him, free to make her own decisions. They told him they couldn't intervene unless there was concrete evidence of danger or foul play. Rahul tried to convince them. He showed them the text messages, pointed out how different they were from her usual way of communicating, and explained that she would never just vanish like this without saying a word. But it wasn't enough. He returned to the police station multiple times in the days that followed, asking them to trace her phone, check her travel records, or contact mobile service providers. Still, he was met with the same response. Without proof of a direct threat to Sheena's safety, they could not and would not take action. Days passed, and there was still no news from Sheena. There was not even a trace of activity on her social media profile. Rahul, growing increasingly desperate, began searching for her himself. He contacted her college, contacted her workplace, and called mutual friends. But everywhere he went, the response was the same: no one had seen or heard from her since that night. He returned to the police, this time not just with worry, but with urgency. He pleaded with them to at least register her as missing. Still, they refused. The answer hadn't changed. Sheena was an adult, and adults were allowed to walk away if they chose to. But Rahul couldn't let it go. He contacted Sheena's grandparents in Shillong. They hadn't heard anything either. Not a call, not a message. They were distressed but powerless. With limited resources and no formal support, there was little they could do. Even Sheena's younger brother, Mikhail, tried reaching out. He called Indrani, hoping to make sense of the situation, but was met with vague, dismissive replies. As the weeks passed, the silence became more ominous. No travel records, no signs of relocation, no new phone activity. There were no airline bookings in her name. No leads. Slowly, the truth began to set in. Sheena hadn't left on her own. Then, 3 years later, in 2015, an unexpected break came, not from renewed investigation, but from an entirely unrelated arrest. In Mumbai, A man named Shyamvar Rai was taken into custody. He had been caught in possession of illegal firearms, and the cache of unregistered weapons in his possession gave authorities more than enough to open a serious criminal case. At first, his arrest seemed unconnected to any missing persons file. But during interrogation, Rai began to feel the weight of the charges against him. Hoping to reduce his sentence, he offered a surprising claim. He had information about a violent crime that had taken place in 2012, the disappearance of a young woman. At first, the officers were skeptical. Many detainees made outlandish claims to avoid prosecution. But then Rai began to share specific details, names, locations, timelines, that aligned with the mysterious disappearance of Sheena Bora. Rai revealed that he had once worked as a personal driver for Indrani Mukherjee, the wife of influential media executive Peter Mukherjee. During his employment, he had been asked to carry out various personal errands. But nothing compared to what he witnessed in April of 2012. According to Rai, on the evening of April 24th, Indrani had instructed him to drive to a designated location in Mumbai. She was scheduled to meet a young woman, someone everyone believed to be her sister. But Rai knew that wasn't the full story. He overheard the story and suspected that the woman was actually her daughter, not her biological sister. That night, Rai said he saw Sheena get into the car. Indrani and her ex-husband Sanjeev Khanna were already inside. There was vague talk of a trip earlier that day. At some point during the trip, Sheena was offered a drink. Not long after she took a few sips, she began to feel unwell. Her speech slowed, her body weakened. Within minutes, she was passed out. Rai was told to keep driving. They left Mumbai behind and headed toward a secluded, forested area near the town of Pen, the same region where Sheena's remains would later be discovered. Once they arrived, everything changed. Rai described how Sanjeev held Sheena's unconscious body. Indrani ended Sheena's life in the back of the car, calmly and methodically. Rai said he was reminded to carry a large black plastic bag in the trunk of his car. After it was over, the body was placed inside that very bag. From there, they would take further steps to ensure the evidence was gone. After placing Sheena's body in the bag, the group continued their journey, driving deeper into the wilderness. The road narrowed, the city lights disappeared, and eventually they arrived in a remote forested area, far from any paved road or passing vehicle. It was late, and visibility was low. But under the cover of darkness, the plan was executed. Guided by Indrani's instructions, Shyamvar Rai helped carry the heavy bag to a secluded spot off the path. There, in the silence of the woods, he said Indrani and Sanjeev doused the bag with a flammable substance, likely gasoline. Without hesitation, they lit the fire. Flames rose quickly, consuming the plastic and what lay inside. Rai recalled standing there, frozen, as the fire blazed in front of him. The group remained until the fire had mostly burned out, then left the scene, leaving behind only ashes and fragments. The location, method, and details in Rai's account aligned perfectly with an unsolved case from 2012, a case involving charred, unidentifiable remains discovered in the forests near Pen. Until that moment, investigators had never been able to connect those remains to Sheena Bora. There was no known missing persons report to match, and no direct leads to link the body to anyone. Rai insisted that he had not participated willingly. At the time, he said, he was facing serious financial hardship. His family was dealing with significant medical expenses, and he had no means to cover them. Indrani, he claimed, had promised to help, offering to pay for treatment if he followed her orders and remained silent. Desperate and cornered, he agreed. Rahul had never stopped searching. In the years after Sheena vanished, he refused to accept the version of events put forward by Indrani or the authorities. Rahul began collecting everything he could. He saved messages, emails, voice notes, anything that might offer a clue. He spoke with friends, revisited conversations, and slowly pieced together a fuller picture. Eventually, he came across Sheena's personal notes, scribbled entries in which she described the immense psychological weight she carried. She wrote of living a lie, of pretending to be someone she wasn't, and of the fear that her true identity could one day be exposed. She wrote, too, about the pressure she felt from Indrani, the feeling of being watched, controlled. With this material, Rahul pushed for a formal investigation. After tireless advocacy, he succeeded in getting a court-ordered DNA analysis. The results confirmed what he had long believed: Sheena Bora was not Indrani Mukherjee's sister, but her biological daughter. For years, Indrani had crafted a version of her life that omitted her past. She had hidden the existence of her children, Sheena especially, fearing that the truth could unravel the narrative she had built in Mumbai's elite circles. Her reputation, her marriage to Peter Mukherjee, and her social status all hinged on that lie. If Sheena had been recognized as Indrani's daughter, she would have been legally entitled to a share of the family's wealth. This could have complicated inheritances and potentially impacted Indrani's younger daughter as well. For someone as image-conscious and controlling as Indrani, that risk may have been unacceptable. Rahul, meanwhile, found himself isolated. He received no support from Peter's family. In fact, many believed he was trying to tarnish their name. Indrani accused him of fabricating the story to cause harm. But Rahul didn't back down. He approached journalists, hired legal experts, and brought the case into the public eye. Over time, he assembled a powerful portfolio: text evidence, Sheena's handwritten notes, timelines, and finally, forensic proof. With Shyamvar Rai's confession on record, the case gained immediate momentum. His account was graphic, detailed, and specific. Investigators followed up. It wasn't long before arrests were made. Indrani Mukherjee was taken into custody, along with her former husband, Sanjeev Khanna. Peter Mukherjee, too, was arrested, though at that point his exact involvement remained unclear. The charges were built on a growing body of evidence, including Rai's testimony, Sanjeev's partial confession, and DNA confirmation of Sheena's identity. In his own statement, Sanjeev acknowledged key parts of the story. He admitted to being present in the car, confirmed that Sheena had lost consciousness after being offered a drink, and revealed that the body had indeed been burned in a forest near Penn. His confession aligned with Rai's narrative in nearly every way, and finally brought Sheena Bora's long-buried story into the light. Yet, even with confessions, witness testimony, and the discovery of Sheena's remains, the investigation encountered severe obstacles. One of the most troubling was the absence of surveillance footage from the residential estate where Indrani and Peter lived. Every other day had a full record, except for April 24, 2012. That one day, the exact date Sheena vanished, had no recorded footage. On top of that, no physical forensic evidence from the vehicle, the alleged site of the murder, was ever retrieved. There were no traces on clothing, no blood samples, no residual fibers, nothing that could definitively prove what happened inside the car that night. These critical lapses were a direct result of the police's failure to act in 2012. The delay in even acknowledging Sheena's disappearance meant that evidence was either destroyed, degraded, or simply never collected. With access to some of the country's most seasoned attorneys, Indrani and Peter challenged everything. They argued that Shyamvar Rai had fabricated the testimony in exchange for a reduced sentence. Sanjeev's admission was portrayed as a coerced statement, obtained under pressure. Even the DNA results, the evidence that had so clearly identified Sheena, were called into question. The defense suggested lab errors or the possibility of evidence tampering. Piece by piece, the prosecution's case was put under scrutiny. Despite public attention and mounting outrage, no formal convictions were reached. Years passed without resolution. Indrani Mukherjee, Sanjeev Khanna, Peter Mukherjee, and even Shyamvar Rai, all were eventually released from custody. By 2022, the charges still existed, but not one had been sentenced. Benjamin Field was born on October 27, 1990, in Market Harborough, Leicestershire, East Midlands. His father was a Baptist minister, and his mother was a former Liberal Democrat politician who had worked for Age Concern. He had a brother named Tom and a sister named Hannah. His family was known for their large Easter egg hunts and for having Bible readings in their garden. However, some neighbors felt that the family seemed a bit distant, as if they believed they were better than others. Benjamin's father often compared himself to Jesus, which the neighbors found odd. Growing up, Benjamin and his siblings faced high expectations to not only be good citizens but also to become leaders in their pursuits. Benjamin later reflected that none of his relationships, even those with family, were based on love. He grew up in a cold and emotionless household, which led him to feel superior to others. He became arrogant and lacked empathy, traits that persisted during his time at Bishop Stopford School, where he was viewed as distant and unlikable. A former classmate noted that he seemed infatuated with his own intelligence, while another remarked that he was always a loner without close friends. There were moments when Benjamin attempted to connect with classmates, but these efforts usually occurred when he wanted something. For example, during his campaign for class president, he interacted with students as if he genuinely cared. However, after losing the election, he stopped speaking to most of them, illustrating that he viewed relationships primarily as transactions. He often spent his time in the library, reading books and learning complex vocabulary to impress others, frequently slipping these words into conversations to establish a sense of superiority. Benjamin enjoyed arguing with teachers and often corrected them in a condescending manner, which led to frequent reprimands. His arrogance, despite his intellect, hindered his potential. While his brother had already completed his math A-levels early and was set to study music at Cambridge University, Benjamin struggled with his own A-levels and finished with only average grades. Ultimately, he attended Buckingham University to study English literature, a much less prestigious path compared to his brother's achievements. At university, Benjamin maintained his unpleasant and arrogant demeanor, quickly alienating fellow students and lecturers. His arrogance and need to show off were attempts to boost his self-esteem and convince himself of a false image. Struggling academically, he sought other ways to feel powerful, which led him to develop two key habits: compulsive lying and fabricating stories about his supposed successes, such as claiming to be a playwright. Over time, Benjamin became an adept liar, using his skills to manipulate and exploit others, which further inflated his ego. He also developed a troubling fascination with elderly people and began researching topics such as euthanasia and the loneliness experienced by older individuals. Around 2012, when Benjamin was about 22 years old, he started working at the Red House nursing home in Maids Moreton, Buckinghamshire. Instead of providing care, he began to abuse the residents and even recorded his actions. Unbeknownst to him, these videos would ultimately contribute to his downfall. Benjamin viewed his actions as a means to feel powerful, failing to recognize that this behavior characterized someone who preyed on the vulnerable. Before starting his job, he met Peter Farquhar, a 61-year-old novelist and guest lecturer, in April 2011. Their relationship quickly became official through what they referred to as a betrayal ceremony. In his diary, Peter described this event as one of the happiest moments of his life, expressing relief that he no longer feared dying alone. Peter Anthony Scott Farquhar was born on January 3, 1946, in Edinburgh, Scotland, but he spent most of his life in England. While not much is known about his early years, he was clearly academically gifted. He attended Latimer School in Hammersmith, London, before he earned a first-class degree in English from Churchill College, Cambridge. Although he was a devout evangelical Christian, Peter was also gay. During his journey to find harmony between his faith and sexual orientation, he decided to remain single and devote all his energy to his passion for English and teaching. Throughout his 34-year career, Peter held various teaching positions, including 12 years at Manchester Grammar School in the 1970s and early 1980s, and 21 years at Stowe School from 1983 to 2004. He became a father figure to many students and published his first book in 2010, which told the story of a school chaplain wrestling with his Christian faith and homosexuality. Peter was well loved in his community and cherished by friends, family, but he also faced loneliness. After the death of his mother in 2002, with whom he had lived, he felt increasingly isolated. This fear of dying alone intensified as he lacked close relationships and affection. Tragically, he could not have anticipated that someone would take advantage of his vulnerability and loneliness. Benjamin recognized Peter's emotional vulnerability and later exploited it to exert control over him. After their first meeting, Peter noted in his journal that he had a pleasant experience teaching a class at Buckingham University, mentioning a particularly engaged student named Benjamin who helped things run smoothly. It became evident that Benjamin saw Peter as an easy target, lonely and susceptible to influence. Benjamin acknowledged in his journal that he wanted to take advantage of Peter's yearning for companionship and that he began grooming Peter by pretending to share similar Christian beliefs. In truth, Benjamin lacked genuine religious faith. His true motives were power and control. To get closer to Peter, he joined Stowe Parish Church, where Peter had been a regular for 2 decades. By ingratiating himself into the church community and befriending other members, he aimed to connect with more elderly individuals. Over the years, Benjamin became a church warden, volunteered, and pursued ordination as a vicar. Between 2012 and 2013, he hinted at having romantic feelings for Peter, despite being completely heterosexual and involved with several women at the same time. He manipulated those around him and concocted excuses to explain his absences, telling Peter he was away for job training while he was actually living with one of his girlfriends. In early 2013, Benjamin devised his plan. He tells Peter that he needs a quiet space to study, prompting Peter to invite him to stay at Peter's house in Maids Moreton. Benjamin took full advantage of this invitation, visiting daily and engaging in long conversations with Peter, ensuring he always did his research to sustain their discussions. He positioned himself at the center of Peter's life, frequently expressing affection and concern. Peter wrote in his journal that he hoped God would reward Benjamin for his kindness, as he was dedicated to helping elderly people with dementia at the care home. There is a tragic irony in Peter asking God to bless the very man who would later betray him. Soon after, Benjamin was given a key to Peter's home, granting him unrestricted access. With this power secured, Benjamin began persuading Peter to alter his will to leave his house to him. Benjamin developed a new plan. In October 2013, he confessed his love to Peter, a man 40 years his senior, and expressed his desire to move in with Peter. Peter was profoundly in love with Benjamin, believing he was the answer to his prayers and someone who would ensure he wouldn't die alone. Due to his inexperience in relationships, Peter failed to recognize the risks involved and did not question why a much younger man would want to be with him. Although Peter may have had concerns, he might have been too afraid to bring them up for fear of jeopardizing their connection. Their relationship seemed to be more emotional, but it held great significance for Peter. Benjamin eventually moved in with Peter on January 3, 2014, which was Peter's 68th birthday. Peter wrote in his diary that Benjamin made that birthday special by giving him a beautiful knife made of black wood and mother of pearl. Benjamin politely asked if they could get engaged, and Peter wholeheartedly agreed to it. A betrothal ceremony signifies a formal engagement but is not legally binding like a marriage. For Benjamin, it was a clever way to secure his position with Peter and edge closer to his financial goal. However, he couldn't resist boasting about his intentions online, stating that he hadn't paid for anything and that he would stick around until the person eventually passed away, calling it a win-win situation. Shortly after moving in with Peter in 2013, Benjamin began a systematic campaign of abuse and manipulation. He ordered sedatives or obtained them from the nursing home where he worked, then mixed them into Peter's food and drink. Benjamin also rearranged Peter's belongings, hid his clothes, and deleted contacts from his phone. Benjamin found sadistic pleasure in watching Peter become confused and question his sanity. Journal entries from that time indicate that Benjamin's goal for 2014 was to manipulate Peter into changing his will. By November, he succeeded. Peter altered his will to leave Benjamin half the value of the house and a lump sum of $20,000, which Benjamin later pressured Peter to raise to $25,000. Benjamin convinced Peter that the effects of the drugs he was administering were indicative of his declining health. Benjamin misled Peter into believing he needed to organize his affairs in preparation for his death, with one caveat: Benjamin could only inherit if he had lived in the house for 2 years. This meant that Benjamin's plan to kill Peter had to be postponed until late 2015. This plan was evident in a journal found by the police, where Benjamin expressed that ending Peter's life was his sole objective for 2015. They also found a drawing he made of a grave with the word goal next to it. Meanwhile, Benjamin noted in his writings that he would continue to gaslight Peter for amusement. As 2015 progressed, Benjamin's strategy escalated. Peter, unaware that the man he trusted was secretly torturing him, endured a countdown to his demise. Between early 2015 and Peter's death in October, Benjamin drugged him at least 50 times. Initially, Benjamin used sedatives purchased online or stolen from the care home where he worked, but later he introduced hallucinogens that caused Peter to experience terrifying hallucinations. Benjamin took joy in publicly humiliating Peter. A social man, Peter enjoyed attending dinner parties and going out, including theater outings. Benjamin would drug Peter before these events, ensuring he would fall asleep, struggle to communicate, and embarrass himself. Benjamin attended these outings, reveling in Peter's struggles. Over time, Benjamin manipulated Peter to the extent that he suggested Peter had developed an alcohol problem. In the months leading up to Peter's death, Benjamin worked to convince Peter's friends and family that he was battling alcoholism, even posting about it online. Peter was drugged to the point of falling and sustaining serious injuries, which Benjamin recorded in his diary. Despite becoming increasingly aware of his declining health, Peter had no idea that Benjamin was the cause. One of Peter's diary entries captures his confusion and growing worry. He mentioned that he had been feeling tired and lethargic for a few weeks and was occasionally losing his balance. He also noted that Benjamin had been very kind. Benjamin did more than just write about his crimes, he filmed them to relive his sense of control. On at least one occasion, he recorded Peter while Peter was bedridden and under the influence of a banned substance. In the video, Peter can be heard mumbling incoherently. As Peter approached death, his journal entries became increasingly odd, as he was convinced he was losing his sanity. By July 2015, just 3 months before Peter was murdered, Benjamin had increased the dosage of hallucinogens he was giving Peter. This exacerbated Peter's condition, leading to frequent night terrors and disturbing hallucinations. In August 2015, Peter attended the launch of a novel he had written years prior, which had just been published. This event showcased Peter's declining health. He appeared confused, embarrassed, and struggled to stay awake. He had difficulty signing copies of his own book and spoke with a slur. Benjamin was present and fully aware that he was the reason for Peter's suffering. He continued to spread the false narrative that Peter was an alcoholic to isolate him from anyone who might suspect the truth. Between April and August 2015, Peter was hospitalized multiple times due to falls, hallucinations, and extreme tiredness. Each stay involved a brief admission during which he showed some improvement, but he returned home only to be drugged again by Benjamin. Benjamin was aware of a condition in Peter's while stating that he could not inherit anything until living with Peter for 2 years, a term that would expire around September 2015. Until then, Benjamin focused on torturing Peter rather than killing him. After that deadline, however, Benjamin decided he wanted to murder Peter. The constant use of sedatives and hallucinogens pushed Peter into deep despair, leading to feelings of wanting to end his life. In response, Benjamin suggested that Peter's symptoms could be early signs of dementia and implied that this might be a solution. Although Peter struggled with his thoughts, he was not ready to end his life. When Benjamin realizes that he cannot manipulate Peter into harming himself, he decides to go ahead with the murder. There appears to have been at least one unsuccessful attempt on Peter's life prior to the fatal assault in October 2015. On October 3, 2015, Peter was admitted to the hospital after being found unconscious at home by his cleaner. He had high levels of sedatives and alcohol in his system, raising concerns about a possible attempt at self-harm. When asked, Peter could not remember anything and denied any intentions to harm himself. After a short hospital stay, he was discharged and returned home. In reality, Benjamin had drugged Peter and forced alcohol into him, hoping the combination would be lethal. However, this attempt failed. A few weeks later, Benjamin made another attempt, and this time he succeeded. On October 25, 2015, Benjamin again drugged Peter, ensuring he was heavily sedated and too intoxicated to resist. To make sure Peter was dead, Benjamin suffocated him, likely with a pillow. Once he was certain Peter was dead, Benjamin left the scene. The next day, Peter's cleaner called emergency services, reporting that Peter was unconscious and not breathing. When responders arrived, they found Peter dead on his sofa, next to a half-finished bottle of whiskey. Benjamin's manipulative actions had led to a tragic conclusion. The coroner determined that Peter died from acute alcohol intoxication while at home alone. Initially, his death was not deemed suspicious. He was buried, and his will was executed. Benjamin inherited $77,000 from the sale of Peter's house, which he used to buy a flat for himself. It is heartbreaking to consider that Peter spent his final years believing he had found someone who loved and cared for him, only to discover that this trusted person was planning his death. Eventually, Benjamin was caught and taken to court, where he admitted to drugging Peter, claiming he did it because Peter's nighttime activities disturbed his sleep. One of the most heartbreaking pieces of evidence is a photo of Peter's face, bruised from the fall. In the months leading up to this tragic incident, Peter suffered from a mysterious illness and consulted many doctors, undergoing numerous tests. Meanwhile, Benjamin calculated his actions carefully, often calling emergency services to falsely suggest that Peter was showing signs of dementia. Benjamin's manipulative behavior extended beyond Peter. In November 2014, he met Anne Martin, whom Peter had introduced him to, and exploited her loneliness for his benefit. Although he was 57 years younger than her, he was able to win her affection. He even took a compromising photo to manipulate her into becoming closer to him. Benjamin gifted in various items, including a framed picture that said he would always be with her. She displayed it prominently to indicate her feelings for him. He also gave her a hand counter and instructed her to click it every time she thought of him. In her notes, she recorded how frequently she used the counter and expressed her love for him. Continuing his deceit, he fabricated a story about needing a new car and managed to obtain $5,600 from her. He even told Tom's brother that he was suffering from severe kidney disease and needed a dialysis machine, but that was a lie. Nevertheless, Anne believed him and transferred $35,000 to him. Worse still, he manipulated her during a phone call with the bank, making her believe that the money would save his life. She genuinely cared and told the bank that she didn't want to selfishly keep the money for herself. Benjamin's deceit didn't end there. He wrote fake messages on her mirror, pretending they were from God, to persuade her to change her will in his favor. It is absurd to think that she could be led to believe that God wanted her to leave her house to him. Fortunately, before she passed away from natural causes in May 2017, she was able to change her will to leave her money to her family instead. Anne's niece testified in court about her aunt's gradual realization of the deception by Benjamin. She described meeting him at her aunt's house after her aunt's hospitalization, mentioning his strange behavior. When asked if he had taken any money or attempted to alter her aunt's will, he denied it and claimed to be in love with her aunt. However, she found this quite laughable and suspected that his true motive was merely her aunt's wealth. During Anne's hospital stay, Benjamin attempted to visit but was denied access. In response, he called the police to inquire about the situation, revealing that his calls were more about understanding how much the police knew about him than concern for her well-being. After a decision was made to exhume Peter's body, a second post-mortem found that he had consumed less alcohol than previously thought and had sedatives in his system. Dr. Brett Locke, a consultant forensic pathologist, testified that Peter died from a combination of alcohol and lorazepam, which could have impaired his breathing, and he could not rule out the possibility that Peter had been smothered. Toxicology results indicated that Peter had been exposed to lorazepam and other sedatives repeatedly in the months leading up to his death. When police searched Benjamin's home, they found various items, including diaries with a list titled 100 clients. Benjamin explained that these were potential targets for fraud or other schemes, and the list included his own family members along with Anne Martin. Authorities also discovered books about poisoning and planning to end his life. An investigator commented that Benjamin seemed to enjoy causing pain for financial gain and control. While he denied intending to kill Peter, he admitted to lying to them and Anne, and he confessed to obtaining money using fake names. During Benjamin's trial, his friend, magician Martin Smith, faced charges of conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and burglary. Benjamin was arrested in January 2018 and was informed of his rights during the trial, including a warning that he did not have to say anything that might harm his defense. After his arrest, psychiatrists diagnosed him with either narcissistic personality disorder or psychopathic personality disorder. On August 9, 2019, he was found guilty of murdering Peter in 2015, although he was acquitted of attempting to murder and Moore Martin, who passed away from natural causes on May 12, 2017. In the same trial, Benjamin admitted to committing fraud and burglary involving both Peter and Anne. In October 2019, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 36 years. One family member expressed their concerns, stating that they hoped he would not be released until the authorities were completely assured of the circumstances. Martin Smith's role in the case remains unclear. He was ultimately found not guilty of all charges. Although there were suspicions that he might have been involved in Benjamin's schemes, the court did not find enough evidence to connect him directly to the crimes. Similarly, Tom Field, Benjamin's brother, was also acquitted of a fraud charge. If it hadn't been for the investigation that continued after Peter's exhumation, Benjamin might have been freed. Why do you think Benjamin Field targeted Peter Farquhar and Moore Martin? Was it solely for financial reasons, or do you believe other psychological factors were involved? Please share your thoughts in the comments if you'd like to see more videos like this.